Hey YouTube, it's Eric. It's July 29th. We got another Cirucci team brief. It's George and Johnny with me today, and we'll go into right into some of the research that we were doing. We were just talking a bit before we just went live about many topics, but just I'd like to start in today's broadcast talking about this Barry McCaffrey. He is a former United States Army officer. He's known, I think, as the most decorated U.S. Army man like in history. He's received 3 Purple Heart medals, for instance, 2 Silver Stars, 2 Distinguished Crosses, and he was inducted into the U.S. Ranger Hall of Fame in 2007. There's Barry McCaffrey, I guess, is kind of like the epitome of Roman war profiteering in the United States. This guy was also the Bill Clinton's drug czar, Jesuit-educated Bill Clinton's drug czar, that being the director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy from '96 to 2001. But this Barry McCaffrey I found is a very interesting character. He is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and as well as in 2004, he got the James Gibbons Medal or the James Gibbons Award from the Catholic University of America, which is the highest distinguished award that the Catholic University of America gives. So this Barry McCaffrey is very interesting. He became I'll pull up the official stats from the New York Times article. It mentioned how since 9/11, Barry McCaffrey has made thousands of appearances on MSNBC and NBC as a quote national security expert, and he's always advocating for more war and more money to defense contractors. In this article, it's called "One Man's Military Industrial Media Complex." General Barry McCaffrey has worked for Defense Solutions, DynCorp, and Veritas Capital, all very intriguing organizations. Veritas Capital actually was founded by a Jesuit-trained Robert K. McKeown. And he actually, I think, officially committed suicide in 2012, which was very fishy. But this Veritas Capital company is very, very, very intriguing, which General Barry McCaffrey was working with. Also, McCaffrey was working with DynCorp. DynCorp, we know, was U.S. military contractor, which big scandal in Bosnia with DynCorp being involved in sex slave trafficking. But Barry McCaffrey also worked at DynCorp and Veritas Capital, founded by the Jesuit-trained Robert K. McKeown, actually bought DynCorp. So, but the New York Times just says here, General McCaffrey, 66, has long been a force in Washington's power elite, a consummate networker. He cultivated politicians and journalists of all stripes as the drug czar in the Clinton cabinet, and his ties run deep to a new generation of generals, some whom he taught at West Point or commanded in the Persian Gulf War, when he rose to fame leading the, quote, left hook on the left hook assault on Iraqi forces. But it was 9/11 that thrust General McCaffrey to the forefront of the national security debate. In the years since, he has made nearly 1,000 appearances, and this was written in 2008. So from 2001 to 2008, Barry McCaffrey had made nearly 1,000 appearances on NBC and its cable sisters, delivering crisp soundbites in a blunt, hyperbolic style. And he says here, the New York Times continues, he commands up to $25,000 for speeches. His commentary regularly turns up in the Wall Street Journal and has been quoted or cited in thousands of news articles, including dozens in the New York Times. We'll go into some of his work with the Veritas Capital here. But the key, the New York Times hasn't mentioned this, but the key to this general was given the highest honor medal from the Catholic University of America, the James Gibbons Medal in 2004. General Barry McCaffrey. And I found just through the story, a lot of the people close to him that are even mentioned in this New York Times story are have Jesuit connections. Let me see here. Okay, so it says here, so I'll let you guys jump in. I'll just read this one section. We can go back to this article if need be. But it says here, General McCaffrey made his debut as a military analyst in the weeks after 9/11. NBC anchors typically introduced him by describing his medals or his exploits in the Gulf War, or they noted he was a West Point professor, the youngest 4-star general in the history of the Army. That's interesting there. But they did not mention his work for military contractors, including a lucrative new role with Veritas Capital. Veritas was a relatively small player in 2001, looking to grow through acquisitions and Pentagon contracts. Competing for contracts is a complex and subtle sport governed by high bureaucratic bidding rules and the old-fashioned arts of access and influence. Veritas would compete on both fronts. This is just days before the terrorist attacks on September 6th, 2001. Veritas had announced the formation of a quote advisory council of well-connected retired generals and admirals, including General McCaffrey. Quote, they could really pick up the phone and call, and they can really pick up the phone and call someone. End quote. Said Robert B. McKean, the president of Veritas, would later tell the Times. And this Robert B. McKean, the guy who founded this Veritas capital equity defense, this equity firm like buys up defense contractors, kind of like the Carlyle Group. And the Veritas Capital is just as like Vatican infused as the Carlyle Group, from what I've seen. But Robert B. McKean here went to Fordham University, who founded this Carlyle Group. And it's just interesting, on September 6th, 2001, the Veritas Capital got an advisory council together. But this is a really interesting article I recommend people go through. Like this General Barry McCaffrey was constantly lobbying for the U.S. to fund the Iraqi government. Which, if people have watched my report on the situation in Iraq, the Jesuits in the Vatican are very involved in the current Iraqi government structure. The current vice president and prime minister are both openly Jesuit trained. For instance, Adnan Abdul Mahdi and Ali Awad, for instance. So I'll let you guys jump in if you want to. But this McCaffrey is very interesting. His lawyer, Thomas A. Clare, mentioned in the story, is a professor at Jesuit Georgetown University. And this Thomas A. Clare, I found, was actually the lawyer for Chiquita Banana, which was what the United Fruit Company merged into. But Chiquita Banana actually sued the Cincinnati Enquirer in 1989. They got the Cincinnati Enquirer to take down their expose of Chiquita Banana, and they got the Cincinnati Enquirer to publicly apologize on their front page, supposedly because they violated company internal records, something of that nature. But that was Thomas A. Clare, the Georgetown professor, who was Chiquita Banana's lawyer, who is now the lawyer for this Catholic General Barry McCaffrey, who got the James Gibbons Medal in 2004. And this guy's just one of the biggest war hawks in the United States Army. What the Vatican does is the Pope will openly come out and condemn the war, but it seems all of the highest level U.S. generals in the war were Catholic. So what does that say? David Petraeus went to Jesuit Georgetown. He's mentioned in this story quite a bit as being close to Barry McCaffrey. General John P. Abizad, who's the current U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia, is a Roman Catholic. He's mentioned in this story, being close to McCaffrey. There is another guy, I think John Marks. I want to mention this because this guy was a CNN analyst. Where is this?
Let me just say that George wants me to clarify things better, and so in that process, we'll say if United Fruit doesn't strike a bell for you, it's the company that got Allen Dulles and the CIA to overturn the communist government of Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala in 1954, because Arbenz was taking his communism just a little too seriously, and found out that a massive amount of Guatemala's territory, geographic territory, was owned by United Fruit, and thought that he would just go ahead and take that back and give that out to the people. Now, even though communism is a Catholic creation for the purpose of bringing power back to the Pope, Mr. Arbenz needed to be put in his place. And this is often slanted as attacking a communist. And this is a great hard right conservative CIA flag waving victory. But the bottom line is that he took his communism too seriously, pissed off the wrong Catholics, which is what really happened in Guatemala in '54. And that's
Well,
United
you
Fruit.
know, right after they took out Arbenz, in terms of the concessions of the Catholic Church, like the church was able to, you know, begin to regain its tax-exempt status. The church began to have its own schools. That, you know, the whole 9 yards. Catholicism became enmeshed in Guatemalan society post Arbenz coup.
And I know we've all seen that documentary. Of course, it never makes to a documentary before the spin takes place. Something like A Coup Made in America, something like that, in which Everett Howard Hunt, whom Skull and Bones Roman Catholic William F. Buckley brought into the quote Catholic communion. In fact, Buckley was his godparent of his children. Needed to be the godparent of his children when his CIA wife was murdered in a plane crash trying to manipulate the Nixon government, which the Skolnick article brings up.
Yeah, Skolnick wrote about that. That was really interesting how Hunt's wife died. And you know, yeah, you mentioned Hunt's son's name is even like Saint John Hunt.
Great point. Yeah, St. John Hunt, George, and brings out the Johannism of the ancient Johannism of the Templars, which is to worship John the Baptist as the real Messiah. And if you do that, then you can spit on Jesus Christ, step on the crucifix, and the various things the Templars did, which was slanted to believe to have been Satan worship and was probably nothing more than worship, heretical worship of John the Baptist as the real Messiah.
Okay, could I just mention a couple of things? You mentioned, Eric, you mentioned this group called Veritas, which is that I decided to look up that word. Veritas, or veritas in Latin, means truth. You can probably figure it out. However, it's more than that. It comes from Roman mythology, which is ultimately comes from Greek mythology. Veritas was the Roman goddess of truth, and she's often portrayed as a virgin, a perpetual virgin. As a matter of fact, Veritas is on the Supreme Court, is outside the Supreme Court of Canada in Ottawa.
Oh, fantastic! Wow, great point, George. And just another one. I found in front of the Supreme Court in the U.S. There's from according to Wikipedia, apparently there is a centaur holding a Roman fasces. But yeah, keep going, George. I just wanted to add that in.
Okay, I'm sorry. I need to step out for just a moment.
Oh,
so I'll be right back.
Oh, gotta love George.
Oh, George,
George, mute your microphone.
Yeah, are you able to mute your mic, George?
Sorry, I need to step out for just a moment.
Step out. Do something. Mute your microphone. Close it out. Come back. Go. Holy shit.
Sorry. I'll be right back.
Sounds good, man. It's a good point with
unbelievable. George, hang up.
George, yeah, the mute button should be on the bottom left if you're on your.
Throw your phone into the toilet, for fuck's sake.
Okay, I'm
only George.
Sorry about that. I'll be back in just a moment.
Yes. Talk to you shortly.
Yeah, it looks like he's okay. He's got his mic situation sorted out. No, it's a good point. Veritas means it's a Roman. Everything about it is Roman. You know, it means truth in Latin, which is the language of Rome. But you know, Veritas seems to be a representation as well of a pagan goddess, the perpetual virgin, that being, you know, the Isis, the Semiramis, the Kuan Yin.
Which has nothing to do with the Virgin Mary, which has nothing to do with Miriam, the mother of Jesus. It's another Roman psyop to cunningly mix Luciferian paganism in with the trappings of Christianity It's a myth that it's very ancient and goes back very far, and should further condemn our buddy Veritas Aquitus there on Reddit as a papal coadjutor.
Yeah, they did. I know Aquitus is also Latin. I have to look what that is. But yeah, that is odd that you'd be exposing the Vatican and use Latin in your name. It's odd. And I've been banned from that website completely. And
Yeah,
even like
because he won't give any credence to the very valuable accusation that William Shakespeare was not a historical person, and that behind William Shakespeare was almost certainly Francis Bacon, and behind Francis Bacon was Jesuit Toby Matthew. How could you, if you're exposing the Vatican, how could you not find that accusation extremely appealing, especially given all the facts behind it?
well, I know it's under Matthew is known as his alter ego officially. Like there's not so that would translate to being Bacon's like best friend. Being his alter ego. So obviously Bacon is going to be influenced by his best friend. And it's just and when I did that write up, there was no mention at all from him. He didn't even acknowledge the Toby Matthew like aspect of the write up at all. He just completely brushed over it. And he gave me a Wikipedia page and he's like, look, you see, like it's not. Look at all these possible Shakespeare authors, and like as if like that just like refuted like everything in the post. Like and like with Bacon, like even like Bacon like would write on pseudonyms. Like there's this Johann Valentin Andre figure who comes up as one of the founders of Rosicrucianism, who supposedly was only 15 years old when he officially wrote The Chemical Marriage of Christian Rosicrucians. And I just like George, in cases like this, George Washington was supposedly 15 years old when he wrote his Rules of Civility, and what happened in that case? He ghost writ it, aka plagiarized it from a book of a Jesuit etiquette manual. But this Christian Rosenkreutz, like I always thought, how could this 15-year-old be so prolific in philosophy, alchemy, astrology, jurisprudence, the legal profession. Like Bacon was a lawyer. Like how could a 15-year-old understand like law, like the way, like in depth, and how could he make allegories from law to like alchemical philosophy? So I'm like pretty like high bar for a kid to do at 15 years old. But then I realized that Bacon was alive at the time Andre was alive. They looked very similar, and it was actually like it was a Manly P. Hall. The quote he gives is from a book by Lord Robert Burton, The Anatomy of Melancholy. But he shows a picture that Johann Valentin Andre signed, where he signs it as Lord Verlium, which was actually Lord Verlium was the aristocratic title of Sir Francis Bacon in England. Both of them were alive at the same time, but just it lines up. And just Andre wrote a book called Christianopolis with the Jesuit IHS right on the title. Manly Hall, to his credit, has put a lot of work out in the wilderness. Even in the Secret Teachings of All Ages, he puts enough, evidence in that book that shows that Andre possibly could not have. Like, it's kind of fishy about Johann Valentin Andre being a real historical person, and it's more likely that he was just a pseudonym of Francis Bacon. And and with the Jesuit IHS that Andre put on his book with Bacon, and Bacon having that connection to Toby Matthew, it becomes undeniable to say that Bacon wasn't influenced by the Jesuits. And Bacon, like the Cambridge Encyclopedia, like I found this in H.G. Wells's book Crux Ansata. I also found this in the Jesuit Charles Constantine Pye's S.J., who was the U.S. Senate chaplain in the 1830s, kind of bragged about it in his book Saint Ignatius and His Companions. But Pye's S.J. and H.G. Wells quote Bacon saying that he respects the Jesuit education system the most out of all of them. And Bacon was praising the Jesuits, and in terms of the Jesuit schools, like Bacon was a big fan.
Let me also say that Toby Matthew was knighted by authorized version King James of England because he attempted to finalize a Catholic marriage with James's son Charles. Now, James is that. This is why I'm so suspicious of particularly the phony Baptists that want to blow up the King James version is inerrant, and James the first of England, James the sixth of Scotland, the same person, blow him up as some sort of demigod, some sort of Christian demigod. He was a piece of crap, like everybody that was ever a sovereign ever. He's a piece of crap. He was a phony Protestant who was only Protestant because he was riding the wave of anti-Catholic sentiment after Luther's protest, and then after Henry's supposed phony break with the Catholic Church. His mother, Mary, Queen of Scots, was a devout Roman Catholic, and his son, Charles, who became king, precipitated the English Civil War because of his ties to the Catholic Church. So everything that I see about James the First of England, aka James the Sixth of Scotland, the few things that I see that are negative of him being a sexual deviant and corrupt, I absolutely believe it. I don't want to have this devolve into a question over Bible translations. Is a completely different topic, but I know that there are a lot of frauds in this debate who spin the worth, and it is a very worthwhile translation. The problem is that it's to this very day it's maintained in piglet in Shakespearean gibberish, which is also credited to Francis Bacon. The creation of the language, Elizabethan Shakespearean language, is also credited to Francis Bacon. But behind Bacon, is Sir Toby Matthew, knighted by Authorized Version King James, because he tried to arrange a Catholic marriage. It failed, by the way.
Yeah, the Catholic woman's name was Marie Anna of Spain, who was going to marry Charles.
Yeah, good for you. What do they call her? Because she was an heiress, they call her Antifada or something like that, right? She had a special title.
Spanish and Fada. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bacon being invited to the court, Matthew being invited to the court. People like Francis Bacon had one of the highest positions in the English government at this time. He was the Lord Chancellor of England, a pretty powerful position. So he doubtlessly was involved in bringing Toby Matthew to the court. It shatters like you said. I think it proves that James was riding the Protestant wave, because no genuine Protestant would invite a literal Jesuit to his court. Toby Matthew was ordained by Cardinal Bellarmine, but from all people.
Yeah,
that was a full-on Jesuit. Like, he gave all of his possessions to the Society of Jesus. He wasn't just flirting with the Jesuits. Like, he full-on, like, probably fourth vow. So so like you said, it shows. I think it for people in this community to even like the anti-Jesuit, anti-Vatican community, to prop up the King James version, like you said, as like a divine, infallible text, is very silly when you can find clear, open Jesuit Vatican connections to that book. And using the same research methods that a lot of these researchers do to come to other conclusions about the Jesuit order, but they won't. They just put their blinders on when it comes to the King James.
Right. Yeah. It's a verse. I know George is back. Welcome back, George. I'm trying to break in. I just want to say that part of this is so typical. If nothing else, even if you're not a Christian, it's illustrative. It's illustrative of the tactics that they use. The tactic is to take something that is worthwhile and spin it and push it to an unhealthy extreme. That is what is very appealing to them as they muddy the waters. They take a worthwhile translation that has much more reliable manuscripts behind it, as opposed to the fabricated manuscript of Constantine von Tischendorf, who is just absolutely owned by Rome, that most of, if not all, the major translations are based upon, and then spin it to the ridiculous extreme that the King James Version is inerrant and the King James Version with all the Shakespearean gibberish needs to be read constantly and has no negatives to it whatsoever. Meanwhile, if you're a Christian and you're handing somebody off the street a Bible, you don't hand them a King James. You don't hand them a Bible like that because you need a translation for the translation. Even if it is more accurate, if it has fewer of these contradictions that were placed in the von Tischendorf manuscripts that became the nearly inspired version and all these other modern translations, it still is a handicap. It still is a problem. And these King James onlyists are very suspicious. You got clowns like, what's that Jesuit there in Texas?
Denlinger?
Denlinger's another one, but even good for you, an even more obscure Jesuit. Absolutely, that clown with this big woolly beard. But Stephen Anderson is who I was thinking of.
Anderson, excuse me,
Go ahead, George.
not to be nitpicky, Anderson is in Arizona. He's in a suburb of Phoenix.
Well done. I thought he was
Yes,
Texas. And you know what, George? Even more because he's been a frequent guest of the Alex Jones show. How did he get over there from Arizona then? He obviously is very important. He's a nobody. He's got like 20 numbnuts there in his congregation, and yet he's been a regular guest on the Alex Jones show, and I'm pretty sure more than once in studio.
Well, okay. That reminds me of the late Fred Phelps, not Eric John Phelps. Was it? He had a website, or has one called GodHatesFags.org. He pastors a church, or he did pastor a church somewhere in nowhere, Kansas. But even though he had like maybe 20, 30 parishioners, they're able to fly all over the country, Phelps and his church, to protest military funerals because the U.S. now allows homosexuals in the service. So how did the Phelps Church get all this money to purchase all these tickets to fly all over the country to do these protests?
To be the Catholic Intelligence Agency, or one of the Catholic Intelligence Agency's phony saving and loan funds would have a lot of money.
Okay, so the purpose of this Phelps, Fred Phelps, and Stephen Anderson is to impeach true Protestantism, to say, oh, they're a bunch of wackos. They practically worship the King James. They hate, they hate homosexuals, and if you're practicing sodomite, effectively you're going to hell. And they say all these egregious things. I've made the mistake of actually watching some of Anderson's sermons, and he says the most ludicrous things. Forget my language, but he said, in Germany recently, I understand they passed a law saying that a man can't, when he relieves himself, he can't stand. I kid you not, they're going to remove the urinals in Germany. And he said, well, I'm a man, for crying out loud, and I'm going to stand when I had to tinkle, because real men stand when they when they
yeah. And George, great example, George. I think you're absolutely spot on. I think these individuals work for Rome, and in those cases, certainly for Stephen Anderson, I say, based on all the evidence, he's an incognito homosexual Jesuit priest, ordained Jesuit. Now, Jeremy's in the chat, and Jeremy said, for instance, I'll give you a contrast with Jeremy. Jeremy says, President Obama is a Jesuit, and a lot of people don't understand that Jesuits don't turn on their own unless you break the code. Jeremy, I don't use exaggeration. I don't know if you seriously think that Barack Obama is an ordained Jesuit. I've seen no evidence of that. I've seen plenty of information that he's completely manipulated by the Jesuits. He's owned by the Jesuits. He's trained by Jesuit Greg Galuzzo, so-called ex-Jesuit Greg Galuzzo in Chicago. He's owned by the Jesuits. He was manipulated because he was sexually abused by his own communist father, who got his start in Chicago, there with Vernon Jarrett, another communist black. And so I don't say that. When I say Stephen Anderson is a Jesuit, I mean I think he is an ordained Jesuit priest. Same thing with Eric Phelps, an ordained Jesuit priest, because it's in their oath to pretend to be their enemies, to discredit their enemies. And George, I think you've got a phenomenal point. I don't know about Phelps, but I would also say that Phelps, if Fred Phelps isn't homosexual, he had, and I'm sure I've got evidence of this in my dossier on him, of some sort of sexual shenanigans in his past, whether done to him or he did to someone else, and that's warped him and pushed him into that direction. So
Well,
that
in a ton of these cases where you see this over the top, outrageous, just shunning of gays, for instance. A lot of the times, the people who are doing the shunning are gay themselves, and they're just projecting.
Right, extreme self-loathing. Right, extreme self-loathing. And I will tell you from the point of view of a flawed practicing Christian, it's no different. Being homosexual does not rate the extreme anger and hatred and vitriol that these clowns throw. It's from a Christian point of view, it's what we call sin. It's no different from being addicted to pornography, no different from stealing, no different from murder. It's all bad behavior and does not require. And this is what they do. They spin people up. They encourage these so-called gay pride parades that are in your face to anger people, where you have it's outrageous, perverse. I mean, Babylon, literal Babylon of marching down the street. Males and males, females and females hanging on each other, scantily dressed. Just ask Roger Stone what that's like. He took his shirt off and jumped in on one. But it's the purpose is to get people angry and to have them disconnect their cognitive thinking, and to go to unfair extremes in addressing something that is they find morally or ethically wrong. In this way, you can spin it to the point where even if you have a good point, you're still wrong. So,
great
anyway,
point. With Steven Anderson, I know you guys have played the clip, but he has said that which could give credence to him being a fully ordained Jesuit, because this is pretty obvious disinformation. But Anderson said that the Vatican used to be the great whore, but it isn't anymore, which is very, very concerning. And I would say, and with Phelps, in Denlinger, Eric John Phelps, not Fred Phelps, but in the interview Eric John Phelps did with Denlinger, I thought this was very revealing. He actually says that he got within walking arm's distance of Peter Hans Clovenbach. Eric John Phelps does that.
Well, yeah, he when on one of my several visits to him in his house, he promised us to bring me into the Jesuit catacombs in Pennsylvania. I was like, I don't know if I want to take you up on that. How the hell are you going to get in there? He's also real big. I'm not surprised. Now, I've said this in the past in my show, Resistance Rising, that I don't do anymore. They're a circle jerk, the three of them, Denlinger, Anderson, Phelps. They're all connected. They interview each other. They attack each other. They get into a circle jerk together to spin people up. And the foundation of the circle jerk is Rome. So it's for King James, against King James, for whatever, against homosexual, whatever their spin is. It's fascinating. I think it clearly condemns them all. The fact that they're all connected to each other, they all talk about each other, and sometimes they interview each other too. So,
and of course, they also do things together. They we won't get into that. But anyhow, another name you've never brought up before is: are you familiar with the minister in Minnesota, Jason Cooley?
George, I was going to bring him up. He was on the tip of my tongue, and I wasn't able to work him in. I think he's another one. He's another phony Baptist that discredits himself. I think I might even have started a dossier on him as a result. I've had personal communication with Mr. Heine, and it did not go well. What do you have on him?
Okay, I actually spoke with him something like 3 or 4 years ago a couple times, and you know what? He actually has some good material. It's not quite the same caliber as, say, Eric John Phelps. Of course, there's no need to discuss his views on the King James. No, Jason, assuming that's his name, Jason Cooley, does have some good material on Hollywood, things like that. rock and roll music, things like 501c3 holidays and Christmas. As I said, he has some outstanding material. However, he has a number of views that I find concerning. For example, one of these problems, I'm not sure how this started, and I may have mentioned on the show before that I had been part of this. Within Protestantism, you have different camps. You have different flavors, but particularly among the Baptists, you have almost like this elitist type view. Came about in the 19th and 20th century, particularly in America. You have Trail of Bloodism, Landmarkism, Baptist Brightorism, in the belief that the true Christians that existed in Europe, Eurasia, North Africa, prior to the Reformation, were Baptists. Now, I just want to say, yes, there were groups that existed in Eurasia, North Africa, that were not part of the Catholic Church and were not part of the so-called Eastern Orthodox churches, the Albigenses, the Waldenses, and so forth. And they like to, these people who hold those views say, oh, yes, they're Baptists. Well,
George, the purpose for all that, George, is division. The purpose for that is divisiveness, is to take the enemies of Rome and divide up the camp. I have to tell you, and I don't know if I mentioned this, it was on my tongue, Phelps is also all about the King James only. As a matter of fact, he offered to bring me on his radio station to be a host. And he told me very specifically I could only use the King James version. I'm like, what the heck? What kind of restriction is that? Are you nuts? And I told him I would not do that, and he was going to drive on with the offer anyway. The purpose is divisiveness. I will tell you. I went on to this Jason Cooley guy. There are, oh my goodness, another one is a nice person in Facebook sent me the producer, a video of the producer with an interview of Christian J. Pinto's, one of his documentaries. And I think it was the documentary on the Bible, Light in the Dark, something like that, I think it was. And that particular interview. Go ahead, Jim.
Which actually, I've seen that, and that for the most part, is good. Light in the Dark, it has some excellent material. However, I have some qualms with Pinto myself.
Yes, all of those. George, I have not seen, and I don't mean to leave poor Eric in the dust as we devolve into all these Christian and Bible issues. But just to say real quick, it's important to anybody, Christian or not, to understand that we have not found anyone sincere who is exposing the Catholic Church on those. And I have never found anyone that I trust who calls themselves a devout Baptist. At least when I run across the Adventists, I can say
it's a good point. And I would add, I found this guy this week. I sent you guys this guy's book. I think his ministry is called Bible-Based Ministries. His name's Sean Wilcock. He wrote a few books against the Jesuits, but it's to your point that they want the opposition against the Vatican and the Jesuits to be completely divided. So I think Sean Wilcock fits this description. I'll link his book in the live chat, but it's a decent book. It's called Jesuit Hollywood. Is one of his books. But Sean Wilcock, I found in a way I think he does division. Well, one, he just dismisses Seventh-day Adventism as a cult.
That's two strikes. That's two strikes. George, Sean Wilcox is the guy that we were trying to think of when you were talking to me, and that was who Eric brought up, who also claims is the same guy that claims that Alberto is a fraud, Eric?
Yeah, I was going to get into it. I'll link that. You can find the video. If people type it on YouTube, Sean Wilcock Alberto. He did like a long video where he was, it was all about, and it was all secondhand information. It was all about, people who worked under Alberto, said this. I think it was, I didn't, enjoy the video at all. I think a lot of it was ad hominem. But divisionary tactic. Why is he attacking Alberto if you're writing books exposing the Jesuits? You should be like
both Adventus and Alberto. Meanwhile, you nailed it. You nailed it on the park to trick you in with fantastic information and then divide you, which is exactly what Phelps does. Trick you in with outstanding information that you can't get anywhere else because it comes from them, and then divide you with ludicrous racism, with Jesuit eschatology and prophecy, or with attacking sincere sources. I have a lot of problems.
Johnny, this actually just I want to mention this part of this this kind of just I think gave away Wilcox's hand. He was just I think he was really like almost like almost to a sense like hiding behind Jesus. He was just coming across in that Alberto video like he's perfect, like he lives an absolute perfect life. Like he was like, oh, Alberto lives a sinful life, like he's like a an unprincipled man, he's wicked, like it was just kind of silly, like every no one's perfect, and he was just giving off this front like he's like this perfect like individual in that video who like never does any.
Great point. Great point. So this is from the non-Christian Eric, which is absolutely brilliant, George. There's no such thing as a perfect Christian. Only Christians that admit their flaws. And this is one of my biggest concerns, guys. This still applies whether you're Christian or not. One of my biggest concerns with the King James only crowd is the King James. They love to quote Shakespearean gibberish because it sounds holy, and then they can get on their righteous high horse and throw it at whatever the so-called gays or whoever their target is, and then quote King James, cite King James gibberish, and sound righteous and make an even bigger ass out of themselves.
Well, I said my part. A lot of the verses do have like a poetic, ring to them.
Sure, but that's just it. It's on a. I will occasionally use it, George. She's trying to jump in. I will occasionally use it. I will rarely use it on a verse that we've heard 100 times before, and I'll use the King James gibberish because there's a poetic twist to something you already know what it means. But if you have no idea what it means, absolutely, I don't even touch it. I told people. As a Christian, again, I don't want to devolve too much into this, but it's important to know this is a high agenda item for Rome. I don't even use the King James regularly. I use a modern translation, and I expect it to have errors in it, but I just stay awake. It's anything. It's when you read the newspaper, you stay awake, expect to have errors in it, and look deeper when you see an error. That's all.
Well, Johnny, if I could chime in, but I will say something about the King James. For example, one of my favorite verses is John 11:35. After the death of Lazarus, his sister says, "He stinketh." Okay.
Well, yeah, it does have an Elizabethan charm to it, George.
Okay. So after Lazarus had been dead for 3 or 4 days,
right.
So, anyhow, but getting to the point, I had to go relatively soon. I mean, I need to be leaving by about noon Eastern, 9 o'clock in the morning my time. So I'll try to. I've fallen behind here, so I need to double time it, so to speak. I'll try. Well, we're talking. I think before we went on the air, we're talking. You were talking about some figures, some people, Barry McCaffrey. Well, for what it's worth, in the 1992 film, A Few Good Men, starring Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson, Tom Cruise's character name was Daniel McCaffrey. Now, I suppose he was an ensign or lieutenant in the U.S. Navy, and he was defending a couple of Marines accused of murder at Guantanamo Bay. Boy, I think we probably could do a whole show just on that movie. But since we don't have time today,
it sounds like a good idea, and if maybe we'll get to some of this today. But I'd like to also. I recently watched the movie The Fighting 69th.
Oh, yeah.
But they put real life people in the movie, like Wild Bill Donovan is in the movie, Father Francis Duffy's in the movie. But it's one of the most I think obvious Catholic propaganda films I've seen in a long time.
Okay, so I'm trying to think of the. Okay, Okay, I'm not talking. This is not supposed to be doing. I'm not doing the piece on A Few Good Men. A movie that came out 25, almost 30 years ago. However, the director was Rob Reiner, son of Carl Reiner. Something that Johnny had mentioned before. Carl Reiner went to Georgetown and he went to the Edmund School Walsh of
Edmund
Foreign
Walsh School of
Service.
Foreign Service. He's a comedian, George. He's a comedian. He was the sidekick of Mel Brooks. What the hell is a Jew comedian doing going to the Edmund Walsh, the Father Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service, for crying out loud?
Yes,
He's a
and
Jew.
of course,
And real quick,
Gestures at the Pope.
yeah, Eric, how many Jewish names are involved in the Fighting 69th? Probably the same number, Metro Goldwyn Mayer that behind Boys Town. What are these overt, sickening, just in your face Catholic propaganda movies? Why are these Jews doing these just full on Roman Catholic Vatican advertising? An hour and a half to 2 hours of just not even remotely truthful Roman Catholic advertising. I
gave him the deniability because I think the official director was Jack Warner, who was Jewish. But like Joe Breen, and that is in the book, The Catholic Church in Hollywood. I'll link this. Joe Breen placed a Catholic priest to be an advisor to Jack Warner while the movie was being made. And like this guy, I don't know if we brought up this guy's name. Have we brought up Patrick O'Brien on a previous show, the actor?
George may have that. Pat O'Brien, James Cagney, all these guys are devout Roman Catholics.
Oh, devout. Pat O'Brien, I was like, holy cow, this guy was like an altar boy at a Jesuit church. You're talking like double or maybe even triple Jesuit trained. And like he played like the Catholic priest in numerous movies. Another one was Spencer Tracy. Actually, Spencer Tracy went to Jesuit Marquette Prep with Pat O'Brien, and then they were in naval intelligence together. Like, are you kidding me? But Spencer Tracy, devout, and he played. Spencer Tracy played Father Flanagan in Boys Town. I haven't seen the movie, but they made a propaganda movie about Boys Town right before the Fighting 69th.
And he was also the hero in the Scopes Monkey Trial movie. Was it Inherit the Wind? Now, why would the Jesuits, George? Why would the Jesuits get behind Charles Darwin and just lambaste those pig-headed, stop up your ears, shut your eyes, foolish Christians that would dare stand in the way of the science of Charles Darwin? And you've got a devout Jesuit-trained Roman Catholic like Spencer Tracy being the hero of that movie, George.
Well, that movie.
Well, that movie, Inherit the Wind, came out in the early 60s, 62, 63. But just now, Tracy had done a number of films with Stan Kramer, who's Jewish. Before Inherit the Wind, he did Judgment at Nuremberg. I know we've discussed this before, but it was about Judgment at Nuremberg was about the trials that were supposed to take place in the German city in the late 1940s. Tracy Spencer Tracy's character was one of the judges there, and he was supposed to adjudicate these evil Nazi judges. One of whom was Werner Klemperer, best known Wilhelm Klink on the TV show Hogan's Heroes. Klink was a brother of Otto Klemperer, the famous German brother or son of the German conductor. Anyhow, the Clippers had an interesting background. They were Jewish. One of their parents was Lutheran or Evangelical, but both the Clippers ended up becoming Catholic. So that was how Werner Klemperer became not a big star, but sort of almost like a cult figure in Hollywood. He did a bunch of other roles. He usually played a heavy, a bad guy. But his signature role was of Colonel Klink on the TV show Hogan's Heroes. Now, Eric was talking about advisors, Catholic advisors on Catholic movies or movies about Catholics. There's another cheesy TV show back in the 1960s called The Flying Nun, starring a young Sally Fields. Before that, I'm sorry?
Yeah, I'm sorry. You got it, Laura. Sally Field. You got it. Keep going.
Okay, prior to that, she was on another cheesy show called Gidget, and she played basically a sex crazed, rock and roll crazed teenage girl. So that was a bit of a contrast. So she went from being this teeny bopper to being this religious sister. Well, anyhow, if you look at Wikipedia, they actually had several priests and nuns who served as advisors to the Flying Nun of the TV show. They said, "Oh yes, this is how they're supposed to dress. This is how they're supposed to talk." It depends upon the order. So even a completely inane sitcom from the 1960s was still controlled by Roe. It had to meet their approval. And speaking of Rome's approval or Rome's control of anything, there's something I wanted to address. We talked about this on the phone yesterday. We on the show we often will throw out terms that we assume people know what they mean, such as psyop, false flag, and something you've used recently is Praetorian Guard. Well, just for clarification, psyop is short for psychological operation, and which is a ruse or deception. False flag is any sort of activity, an attack, shooting, bombing, is carried out is to make it look as if somebody else did it. For example, the Reichstag fire in 1934, for instance. And there's a whole bunch of them.
That was Nazi Germany's 9/11 because the SS was created right after the Reichstag fire, just like Homeland Security was created after 9/11.
Yes, I probably could give 100 examples of false flags, but owing to time constraints, I won't. Now, I'd just like to address the phrase Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard historically were the personal security detail for the ancient Roman emperor. And so you're talking, it went out of use, technically speaking, 1,500 years ago? But the concept still applies because technically speaking, here in the US or Canada, where it is you live, we don't have emperors. Or at least we don't, or at least we think we don't. But you could say the police, the military, the army, whatever, they are the Praetorian Guard now. They are the bodyguard for the de facto emperor, president.
Oh, think about this, George. Like the LAPD they even kind of brag about it on their website. They gave the biggest police protection in the history of the department to Pope John Paul II. Alluding to your point.
Yes, that was over 30 years ago, like 87, 88?
Yeah, and to this day, I believe they still haven't had a bigger police detail than that in 1987. Like even when the president comes to LA, they're protecting the Pope with more resources than the president.
Okay, and so so I just thought I would clarify that.
No, it's a fantastic point, especially like in the U.S. Like law enforcement isn't actually legally obligated to protect individual American citizens, which proves but undeniably that they are the Praetorian Guard. All you have to do is look at how the police were sent out to North Dakota recently for the sole purpose to quash out protesters protesting an oil pipeline there. Like that's what police are being used for. That's a classic example of the Praetorian Guard. They're protecting, the private property of the elites. That in that sense being the oil companies.
Well, I remember reading an article a year or so ago about in your country the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and we here in the United States tend to have a warped perception because the first thing I always think of is Dudley Do-Right, but there I was reading an article, I guess in a Canadian paper, the Toronto Sun, the Toronto Star, whatever it was, and they're talking about the concerted effort to change the image of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police because people seem to have this perception because of the cartoon is they're basically one step above the Keystone Cops. But something people don't realize, well, first, people have this perception they're wearing the red jackets and the hats. and things like that. They only wear those for parade, special ceremonies. They're just regular cops. Most of them, they don't ride horses unless they're during a special ceremony. They drive around in cars. But anyhow, I remember reading the story that there's a concerted effort to not only change their image, but also to make them seem more like the FBI. South
What
of
is
the
their
border.
jurisdiction, George? Are they a nationwide jurisdiction?
Yeah, there'd
Yes.
be Canada's like FBI, if you will. I think that's kind of the equivalent.
Yeah.
Or I guess
And,
they'd be kind of like a mix between the FBI and the U.S. Marshals.
Yeah, their authority, it's a central government authority. So if you've got a problem with if you got a problem with a Mountie or something they have done wrong, you don't have the ability to go to your local police station and get it ironed out. You have to go through a central government representative, which means it's that much easier for you to get buried and them to be corrupt.
Well, absolutely. I call them the Royal Catholic Mounted Police, and a lot of people, like to George's misimpression about them, like they have military equipment. Like the police in Canada, it's not to the same level as it is in the United States, but like Canadian police departments, have armored vehicles, like all sorts of military equipment. And that I think that the most obvious examples of the Praetorian police state are at the G20 summits. Like, holy God, look at the footage from Pittsburgh, even in Toronto, up in Canada. Like, you see how much Canada was a police state when they suppressed the protesters at the G20 in Toronto in like 2008. But look at the footage of those G20 events at Toronto and Pittsburgh. Like, they deployed LRAD devices against unarmed citizens who were peacefully protesting.
They also had troops. They also had military troops. The National Guard often gets deployed at those, and I know that National Guard that I was involved in, the Pennsylvania National Guard was deployed for that any of those G meetings, any of those banker meetings.
Oh, absolutely, and like the line, the posse comitatus line is really like this is like a theme with in the United States. The National Guard is starting to do more and more police work. And this should concern like the logo for the United States Military Police Corps. It has a Roman fasci on it, which should concern everyone. But,
and not only that, but the National Guard. I had a conversation with a friend of mine the other night on the fact that the National Guard is national. It is national. It is not a state military. It does not stay home and take care of the populace of that state for natural disasters and so forth. The Pennsylvania National Guard right now is all over the world, in Macedonia, in Lithuania, in doing active duty missions. The National Guard now has a general at the Pentagram representing them there. They are the cheap version when a politician wants to be extremely corrupt and use the military but doesn't want to have the visibility of using the active military. He'll require part-time citizens to go do the job. He'll require them to leave their family and go deploy. And that's what the National Guard across the country is now doing. It is not a statewide militia. It is a national military force with all the equipment and training and demands of the active duty military, but forcibly staffed by volunteer citizens.
Fantastic points, and that's why you see here. This is a blatant, like the Roman puppets in the United States government, and they even like with their mace of the House of Representatives that has a Roman fasci on it. Like what they're doing is they're violating the Posse Comitatus Act by using the National Guard. Like to your point, National Guardsmen are like our soldiers. You would send the National Guard into Iraq. You wouldn't send the NYPD into Iraq, for instance. So like by giving like all these military guns to the cops, to basically turns the cops into like a secondary National Guard unit. And just there's just and like this is becoming more and more prevalent. There's a story, I might repost this on my channel, in Alabama. The National Guard was actually doing like the policing. I think it was in Jefferson County, Alabama, because I think this was strategic. I think they cut back the sheriff's department budget by 50%. then the sheriff is like, "Oh, we don't have any money. We need to bring in the National Guard." So you had the National Guard, like writing speeding tickets and stuff like that, like just doing routine police work, which is very very concerning. I think, which is showing the fact that like full on military government could be coming down the pipe. That was a big part of the the Patriot Act, and guys like Catholic Barry McCaffrey that we mentioned earlier in the show. Catholic McCaffrey, guys like him and his clique are all about advocating for a police state and ultimately like martial law. Like in the Oliver North. This goes back to that Oliver North hearings. I put that on my channel. And like the guy who was beside Oliver North, who actually called Inouye, Representative Inouye, to like shut down Congressman Brooks's inquiry into the North martial law plan, was Brendan Sullivan, who went to Georgetown. So that should tell people that the Jesuits are at the top of this plan, or the top of the pecking order in terms of martial law in the States.
You make the point. That you never send the NYPD to Iraq, but that's actually not the case. When you've got a good Roman Catholic gatekeeper, police commissioner like Bernie Carrick, you can send him to Iraq. As a matter of fact, that's what happened. Bernie Carrick, the devout Roman Catholic, the gatekeeper there in the police commissioner.
Oh, was he during 9/11? Bernie Carrick?
Yeah. He went to Iraq as a security advisor.
Oh wow. Well, it's I know David Clark took a position with Homeland Security, the Jesuit-trained sheriff in Milwaukee County. So a lot of these plugged-in sheriffs do seem to, that's a pattern. They go to the next level. In terms of New York, Carrick was replaced by James Kelly, devout Catholic. This guy was the head of Giuliani. Kelly was Giuliani's chief of police for he was chief, throughout the duration of the Giuliani era into the Bloomberg administration. But this Kelly was a devout Catholic. He's currently on the board. Actually, it's Raymond Kelly. I thought Raymond Kelly. Raymond Kelly is actually on the board of the Catholic Alfred E. Smith Foundation. So how much and with the current chief, I have a photo on my blog of the current chief. I think it's James O'Neill, was attending mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral with the Holy Name Society within the NYPD. The Holy Name Society has existed for over 100 years within the NYPD, and it was at that you can see James O'Neill beside Cardinal Dolan, and Dolan said that the NYPD's spiritual home is St. Patrick's Cathedral.
Well, of course it is. In the same way that what is that homosexual Monsignor there in Bakersfield, California? I just did a special report on.
Oh, Harrison. What was that?
Harrison. Yeah, Monsignor Harrison there, who's the police chaplain, and the police purposefully dropped multiple accusations, multiple investigations, one in 2002 and one this year, investigating how Father Harrison adopted 4 little boys and raped them. Adopted little boys. How is a Roman Catholic priest adopting children and then raping them, and then the police get called in to investigate and they drop the investigation? That's not enough evidence there.
Johnny, this is that case with Harrison. Actually, I think this was 4 or 5 shows ago, but I made the point that the police can literally, due to the Jesuitical laws in the United States, the police can literally be literally a yard or a meter away from a Catholic priest raping a little boy, and the police can do absolutely nothing, and he has broken no laws, because the police have no legal obligation to protect anyone, but themselves and their corrupt laws that they quote unquote enforce. But Harrison, being a police chaplain, is a member of the police force at the same time as being a Catholic priest, and it's a clear case. That case, the police, that case with Harrison is almost as in the open as that example I just said. The police absolutely knew about his activities for years. He had multiple complaints. The FBI even did an internal investigation. And of course, the Catholic FBI found no wrongdoing. Of course.
The police did an investigation in 2002. The FBI did an investigation in 2004, and the Bakersfield police did another investigation this year, and nothing came of any of those three investigations. Meanwhile, he has the ability. He's a Bakersfield cuffs nobody out in the middle of nowhere, right? Meanwhile, he's got 4 lawyers to defend him against these very large, growing audience of victims. So, few things can prove better than how the Catholic Church owns the so-called secular government of the United States, federal, state, and local, and commits unspeakable crimes through their puppets, their traitorous, oath-breaking puppets in government. Few things prove that better. Are you kidding me? A Catholic priest is the police chaplain. He's adopting little boys, raping the little boys, and neither repeated police nor an FBI investigation brings anyone to justice. He continues on without any problem. And the only reason that we're talking about this is there are civil suits being mentioned by our newest bestest buddy, Michael Voris at the church Church Militant. Who
that was a good, great write up on the keys. I haven't seen any other big.
I want to take let me take a minute. Let me take a minute and give a special shout out to my buddy Mark. What a great friend and often a financial sponsor. He's helped me through the years. Mark has. He's out there driving trucks, and if he's got any spare money, he sends it my way. He heard me talk about how, wow, there's some interesting information coming here. I might have to force myself to become a premium subscriber, even though I don't have the money. Mark immediately got with me on the phone and donated the money so that I can become a premium subscriber to Church Militant. And I'm sure I'm going to get more than a little bit aggravated because according to your friend, George Hugh, who sent me the article in the first place, he's militantly anti-Protestant just as much as he's militantly anti-homosexual Catholic priest. But it still is, just as you said, Eric, a great report. And special thank you to Mark so that I can now jump in and get this premium information there.
Oh, great stuff. And Church Militant, there's some interesting info on that website. Like that's it was Church Militant that had they quoted Donald Trump's sister Marianne Trump saying that the Jesuits literally saved my life. End quote.
Oh, great! Yeah. I'll be sharing everything I get out of it.
Yeah, that was the story they did. They covered the donation, the $4 million that Marianne gave to.
Unbelievable! She's a judge. She's a public official, and she's got a spare $4 or $5 million to give to a Jesuit school. George, I don't know if you want to jump in on Hugh or any of this real quick. I'll give you something else to talk about too. Is in 2010, Bernie Carrick was sentenced to 33 months in prison. There's the magic number again, because of some kind of tax fraud. So, here you have a Roman Catholic insider going very rare. So, I wonder, did he try to do something right and was punished for that? I don't have an answer there.
Oh, okay. So just
one more kind of fishy situation. I mentioned this just earlier in the show, but that Robert McKeon, McKeon, the founder of Veritas Capital, that very intriguing private equity firm which bought up tons of defense contractors. Which Catholic Barry McCaffrey was working at Veritas Capital, for instance. They bought DynCorp, for instance, the company involved in sex slave trafficking in Eastern Europe. But this Robert McKeon kind of just unexplainably died in 2012 or 13, I think.
At any point, this is a dragon that eats its own young. So, if you think you want to do that deal with the devil and think you're going to be, just ask Jeffrey Epstein. Just ask CIA pilot Barryman Steele, who thought he had the goods on both Bush and Clinton doing trafficking cocaine, and then he was assassinated. But, George, we've given you a whole slew of topics, from your buddy Hugh to the Church Militant to Bernie Carrick. What do you got?
Well, I'll go behind door number 4. Anyhow, before I address any of those, I just want to say something in passing. We're talking about chaplains a few minutes ago. You were talking about police chaplain. Just over a year ago, in June of 2018, Eric did a story about the Catholic diocese in Laredo, Texas, because he was doing a report. He was talking about a report that aired on the Catholic channel EWTN, and one of the people whom they interviewed was James Tamayo, the so-called bishop of Laredo, Texas. And they, according to this article, they basically said, my country is your country. They're opening people with open arms to come to this country from Latin America illegally. And as I said, they're talking to Tamayo, who is basically, he's an insurgent, for want of a better expression. Now, we're talking about chaplaincy. Tamayo was actually a chaplain in the U.S. Air Force for 25 years, and he was a colonel.
Yeah, he's interesting. He's a really interesting guy, and I'm pretty sure he's also a Knight of Columbus as well.
Yes. Also, on a more local level, and I know I'm probably not addressing any of Johnny's questions. I do apologize. There's a fellow named John Cruz who was born in 1946. He grew up Presbyterian, but apostatized and joined the Catholic Church and was ordained a Catholic priest in 1971. Cruz was also a chaplain in the U.S. Navy. He obtained the rank of naval captain, which is roughly a colonel in the other services.
Fullberg, that's 06. That pay grade is 06. And by the way, George, this brings up a point that I want to, not to derail you, but you're not answering any of the things I've put in front of you, so I'm going to derail you real quick. It's always been a problem for me how chaplains, doctors, lawyers receive such high ranks, get to such high ranks in the military. That military pay grade allows them the authority to give orders to anyone who is subordinate to them. Meanwhile, they have no authority as a soldier, no experience as a soldier. So a lawyer, a doctor, a chaplain could come in and tell anybody that is their subordinate what to do. Meanwhile, they have not earned that right as a result of experience or training or leadership. And I've always had a very serious problem with that, and I consider it a matter of corruption in any military. And very frequently, these lawyers and doctors and chaplains skip pay grades. You read about this all the time. As a matter of fact, who is it we were talking about? Oh my goodness, NBC. Who's the guy on NBC that I swear they just gifted this guy, Sarnak?
Sarnov. Yeah. The back in World War II.
I swear they just gifted that guy right into being a general. I swear he had no military experience, and boom, he's magically a general. I swear they did.
I think part of that was while he was working at RCA, he signed a big contract with the Soviet Union, and RCA, basically set up the Soviet.
Hey, let's make this guy a general.
And to your point, Sarnov, this is even on the New York Times obituary of Frank M. Folsom, who was a high-powered papal knight, Jesuit-trained papal chamberlain. But this Sarnov personally appointed Folsom to the board made him chairman of the board of RCA.
Well, there you go, George. I didn't mean to derail you, but actually I did. So go ahead and if you have nothing to add, go ahead and pretend that I didn't interrupt you. Check, George, you want to jump back in? Go ahead.
What was that? Check. I was going to say quickly to George's point on the chaplains, that the United States government has a long history of using chaplains. World War I and II, for instance. World War I, one of the most powerful chaplains in the U.S., Father Francis Duffy, was Wild Bill Donovan's mentor. But he was a chaplain. He was a chaplain for the 69th, and this guy has a statue in Times Square. Are you kidding me? And then
that brings us full circle to a bunch of notes you had on that movie. As a matter of fact, I saved them for discussion.
Oh, great! Yeah, let's go into that. And I was just going to admit the World War II chaplain that I found was this guy was a chaplain of the United States Navy, but Joseph O'Callahan, S.J. This guy was a Jesuit, but He was I found it. It wasn't the USS. He was the chaplain on the USS Franklin. That was the ship. You know what's a Jesuit priest? You know, being as a chaplain in the Navy. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
to your point, like as a Navy chaplain, you know, this Jesuit's being briefed on all of like the classified internal Navy intelligence files.
George finally came back. He has problems, and I see Mark is joining us in the chat. Mark, I hope you missed. I hope you didn't miss my shout out to you. You can always go back and grab it. Mark is mentioning this great point that the FBI training center is at Quantico, the Marine Corps post at Quantico, which is a great interlocking issue. But you have this statue you sent of Duffy.
Father Francis. Oh yeah, we'll go into that. Yeah, because in the movie, The Fighting 69th, they got like the most Catholic of an actor to play Duffy, but Duffy in the movie is like portrayed as like the classic warrior priest. And actually, I'll read the little excerpt here from the book, "The Catholic Church in Hollywood." I linked this in the show notes already. And actually, Johnny, I believe you have a wrench now in the chat, so you can.
I do. Yeah, well done. You should too.
I'll give you a wrench too, George, so you'll be able to post stuff.
You probably shouldn't do that because he'll end up being a gremlin and he'll throw the wrench into the machinery, and then all the machinery come to a screeching halt. George is technologically handicapped, as we found out. Was confirmed for us a little earlier. George, are you still there? Check test.
Yes. Okay. If I can just finish my point. So you on 9/11, you had all the appropriate gatekeepers. As I said, Bernard Kirk was a commissioner of the New York City Police Department. Tom Essen was the fire chief in New York City, Roman Catholic. Tom Ridge was the governor of Pennsylvania at the time. Not Roman, he was some type of Catholic, like Ruthian or something like that. George Pataki, the governor of New York, Roman Catholic. Allegedly, both Ridge and Pataki are both Papal Knights of Malta. We've already talked about Rudy Giuliani, who was the mayor of New York City. Roman Catholic, Christian Brother trained, went to Manhattan College, allegedly a Papal Knight of Malta, a sexual deviant. He was a U.S. attorney in charge of a case involving some rapists, child traffickers at West Point. And he basically, Giuliani essentially pulled an Alex Acosta. So you had all the right men in the right spots at the right time on 9/11.
An Alex Acosta or a Frank J. Hennessy. An Alex Acosta or a Frank J. Hennessy, as we found out with Florence Sally. What's her name? The real Lolita. I didn't mean to cut you off, George. But I just
Florence Sally Coppola, I believe. Yeah, and Hennessy also gave that deal to Tokyo Rose.
Yeah, Tokyo Rose. George, I got to credit you because I'm pretty sure you're the one that found out that Tokyo Rose last name is Aquino, which is Filipino, and she's also Roman Catholic. And they waited until the mid to late 40s to finally bring her up because there was so much outcry, and give her a show trial and give her some sort of a nominal sentence. But go ahead, get back on it.
Okay, so Bernard Kirk, I mean, I'm not sure what he did wrong. I mean, how he bit the hand that fed him. But yes, you're right. He got 33 months, 2 years, 9 months for a boo-boo, tax evasion or something like that. And of course, he was like the commandant or whatever it was in Iraq, along with various other figures. So can I just address something that we were just talking about a few months ago? Yes, I would like to talk about Michael Voris and his church militants. You're right. There have been all sorts of figures over the centuries who got positions of authorities. They're colonels, they're naval captains, they're generals, whatever, who are not qualified for that job. Something we discussed over a year ago was Sir Charles Warren, who was the commissioner of the London Metropolitan Police Force in the 1880s during the reign of Jack the Ripper. Now, something I had read recently that actually clarifies something. It was de rigueur that in the London Metropolitan Police, um, in the 19th century and well into the 20th century, for the commissioner's job to be purely a figurehead. They would often give the slot to generals or retired generals. So that would make sense. But you obviously had somebody with Warren who was in a position for which he was not qualified, which he should not have been doing. He was not a cop, he was a soldier and an engineer. And there, I believe Spellman, both Francis Cardinal Spellman and Edmund Walsh, whom we've mentioned before, had commissions. I want to say in the U.S. Army. They're both chaplains as well.
Yeah, well, Spellman had an official position. This was before they created the military archdiocese in '86. Spellman was known as the vicar of the armed forces.
Yes. So so he was over all other chaplains, Protestants or rabbis or whatever. And how so and I understand that Spellman had no oh, I guess we lost Johnny.
It looks like he got cut out. I sent him an invite. I'll give him another one here. Should be back in shortly. Yeah, I just sent him another. Oh, there he
is. Did I get cut off, or did you guys get cut off?
You got booted out just momentarily.
Yeah. Well, at least you guys kept going. Yeah, George, this is a fantastic point of yours. The depth, the detail, the layers of those who are controlled. The Papists had every corner of 9/11, particularly in the key city of New York. It's probably one of the reasons why they went and seeded it up the way they did. Fire department, police department, every level. Of course, the mayor, the pervert, deviant mayor.
Well, think about the two. This is just so in the open, Johnny and George. The two directors of the CIA both had Jesuit education on the day of 9/11. Both director and deputy. That being Tenet and John Brennan.
With George Tenet being, of course, the not overtly Catholic and yet being trained by the Jesuits at Georgetown.
Yeah, it's so obvious. Even like the head of Saudi Arabia's intelligence agencies, who retired 6 days before 9/11, Prince, it's a long name, Prince Abdullah Farouk Saud. I think that's his full name. He was classmates with Bill Clinton at Jesuit Georgetown. I think it was 10 days before 9/11. He just retires. For instance, the connections are over the top, like literally. And like we found, the guy who actually commissioned the buildings to be built initially through the Port Authority, Austin J. Tobin, went to a Jesuit Periarchical School and Jesuit Fordham and Jesuit Holy Cross.
Yeah, he ran the Port Authority for 33 years, right?
Yeah, he was known as the autocratic leader who thought of the 9/11 project. And meanwhile, he was involved in the planning because this thing took over 20 years.
It's a brilliant point. Nobody has heard of this guy. Meanwhile,
oh, check test. You cut out a bit there, Johnny.
Oh, Eric,
can you hear me? Yeah, your volume's good.
Okay, so I just wanted to mention somebody. I came across this. I'm not sure how I came up with Michael Sullivan, U.S. Attorney. He was born in 1954. I know it was off topic.
Oh no, George, was this that Patriot Act attorney from Boston College?
Well, I'll just get to that. Michael J. Sullivan. He was U.S. Attorney for the District of Massachusetts from 2001 to 2009. He was acting director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, 2006 to 2009. So you can just, his name is suspicious right off the bat. And of course, he went to Boston College High School and to Boston College for his undergrad degree. So how did he put all that? And he definitely put all that education to good use. He
I'm saying, if I remember correctly, I think he was advocating for the Patriot Act to become permanent.
Okay, so Sullivan was appointed U.S. Attorney for the District of Massachusetts by George W. Bush on September the 14th, 2001, in the wake of the September the 11th attacks. His early work revolved around terrorist attacks, which were launched from Boston's Logan Airport. Sullivan was the prosecutor in 2001-2002 of the trial of Richard Reed, known as the Shoe Bomber. So that's just that's a psyop within a psyop within a psyop.
Okay, that event was definitely a psyop. Yeah, this Sullivan attorney is a big figure in like the police state. He at the same time he's advocating, the Patriot Act become permanent. He's also a big on gun confiscation too.
Oh yes. Okay, thank you for mentioning that. Tenure is now there's a picture here in the middle of his Wikipedia page where he's Sullivan, second from the right, is recognized by the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration in 2003 as part of his Boston's gun violence reduction program. So he's just like, I mean, how do you describe this? Describe him: Nazi, fascist, terrorist, insurgent,
Yeah, I'd
scumbag.
say a papist insurgent because it's really so obvious. Like the guy who drafted like the Patriot Act, which is like literally the death of democracy in the U.S. Veet Din was a professor at Jesuit Georgetown. Now you have this plugged-in Jesuit-educated lawyer. What was his first name? What was Sullivan's first name?
Michael.
Yeah, you have this Jesuit plugged-in Jesuit or Jesuit-educated plugged-in Michael Sullivan is staunchly advocating for the Patriot Act that was just created by the Jesuit Georgetown professor Veet Din to become permanent in the United States. So he wants the United States to be permanently a surveillance state dictatorship. Like, people should read the Patriot Act. It gives the federal government people don't realize how much power they have. They have the legal right to search all your phone calls, all your emails. You can go to the library, search out what library books you went out. What you can go, the FBI can search your house while you're not there, do a complete download everything off your computer, and then you come home later from work and you don't even know that your house was just raided.
Well, of course.
For instance, that's just scratching the surface. So like the fact that this Michael Sullivan is like permanent, like wanting this to become permanent, I think reveals his hand.
Oh, okay, so I'd just like to address something Johnny brought up a while ago. I know he's having, I guess, some technical difficulties.
Yeah, I just sent him another invite. Looks like he got booted out. Oh, there he is.
Okay.
Back in.
Okay. If I can just address something Johnny brought up a few minutes ago. You're talking about chaplains in the police, whether you're talking about the police department or the army or whatever. What exactly are they doing? You would assume that if you're a Catholic priest, you're probably concerned with people's spiritual needs, hearing their confessions, doing the mass, things like that. However, what else are they doing with their time? Are they spying? Are they planning treason?
I'd say both. Definitely both. But I think a lot of it, for instance, the United States Archdiocese for the Military Services. Like I bet a lot of the top bishops, are working intimately with, the top United States generals. Who 80% of them are those top generals are Catholic, so it's a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a lot. It's probably in an advisory role. So like the generals will be taking orders from the Catholic priests at the military archdiocese. And like the chaplains, like Donovan was probably taking a lot of orders from Father Francis Duffy back in the 69th Brigade back in World War One.
Okay, so this is something people don't realize, and it took me a long time to figure this out myself. The Catholic Church is as much of a political institution as she is a religious one. They're concerned with all facets of society: the military, intelligence, law enforcement, public safety, firefighting, and so it would seem to make sense that these organizations would have chaplains, because they're not really, they're only maybe partially concerned with people's religious needs, hearing confessions, performing last rites, or whatever the case may be. But I'd imagine the bulk of their time, I'm just guessing, is filled with say, oh, yes, you should send your troops there. Yes, you should attack that village there. If you're talking about like an army chaplain. And I'd imagine that because as a chaplain, that's perfect cover. That gives you access to places that you would normally not have access to. And something else that is analogous to that are reporters. Oh yes, I'm in Iraq, I'm in Afghanistan or whatever, because I'm covering a story. Even though I'm actually working for the CIA.
Well, that's documented. This is even in Douglas Waller's official biography on William Donovan. Like William Donovan, the papist, head of the OSS, turned into the CIA, employed many journalists, and he used journalists and Hollywood actors in particular, to get intelligence, and then feed it up the chain of command.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna say it looks like Johnny got booted out again. I'm gonna send him another invite.
Oh, okay. So I had other material to cover. So we wrote in the show, we've established that the Praetorian Guard didn't disappear. It just simply changed its form. And so the police, law enforcement, the military, they're basically the modern version of the Praetorian Guard. And you could say
the George, to hammer home that point, George, the logo for the National Sheriff's Association in the United States has the Roman military reef and fasciae right on the logo, kind of proving that it's a Praetorian Guard.
Yeah, you can say the same thing. You can say the same thing about chaplains as you can about so-called journalists, as you can say about so-called USO entertainers like Bob Hope. They can come and go wherever they want to, and more than once they've been used for espionage and almost always for Catholic skullduggery.
Okay. So even though you weren't with us, were you able to listen to what we've been saying for the last few minutes, Johnny?
No, I got to sit here in the dark and be pissed off.
Okay. So now you can come on air and sulk with us.
Yeah.
To get maybe if you're talking, John, maybe that would help the connection. Do you got anything on your mind? What stuff you want to bring up?
Yeah, well, I just want to make sure that we hit everything we wanted to hit, to see if you got, for instance, you sent a bunch of great information from this Wild Bill Donovan, the clown, Spy Master book there.
Oh yeah, we should go in. Yeah, we should tie that into MacArthur. Yeah, we should bring that up. It's a great because MacArthur, that fighting 69th unit that Donovan fought for merged into, I think, the 165th Infantry, which had none other than Douglas MacArthur as its commander.
Right. Yeah, and at that time he was only a major, the same rank when he crushed the bonus army there in Washington D.C. So
okay.
they take this.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Johnny. So with Douglas MacArthur, at least he had the pretense of having a military background. He was in World War I. He attacked a bunch of unarmed civilians in the early 1930s. Things like that. But at least he went through the motions of rising to the rank, even though he wasn't qualified. Unlike somebody like Sarnoff.
Well, it helped MacArthur. His dad was a general as well, so that probably helps. Like I forget MacArthur's dad's name, but the older MacArthur was involved in the American colonization of the Philippines.
Yeah, very helpful, very helpful. And we all know that how who it was that made it was the Spanish that originally colonized the Philippines and made it Catholic. And just like Vietnam, Romerica came in and took over the Philippines from the Spaniards. And just how Romerica came in and picked up the mess that the Catholic French made in Vietnam.
Oh, absolutely, Johnny. And the guy who was in charge of the Philippines for the United States was Skull and Bonesman William Howard Taft, who, while he was president, nominated the Jesuit-trained papist Edward Douglas White to be Chief Justice, who would then later sign the Federal Reserve Act. And this, William Howard Taft also was Theodore Roosevelt's personal ambassador to the Vatican. This guy was very plugged in. He's the only guy in American history to be president and Chief Justice. So, he was the guy that they chose to be the governor of the Philippines early on, to take over the transition from the Vatican, like the Spanish loot. The Catholic Spanish loot was just given over to the United States, but the Catholic infrastructure in the Philippines remained. And the Philippines is actually one of the most Jesuit. Just really quick, if you just look at, all you have to do is look at the alumni list of Ateneo de Manila University. Like, holy cow, you'll see like 8 or 9 former presidents of the Philippines, like Gloria Arroyo, who is actually, I had to go do more research into her. She's one of the most corrupt officials of the recent history. She laundering like billions of dollars, came out in the Philippines. She went to that Jesuit school. There's been like 2 or 3 Aquinos who have been president of the Philippines. Directly went to that school. There's literally like 6 or 7. And you're talking like, it's more than just the presidents. Like that school is like, in terms of relative to the Philippines, like that school almost has more influence in the Philippines than Georgetown does in the United States. It's pretty crazy.
Right. And by the way, I want to say that we have multiple Aquinos here. And I highly suspect that the clown who was of the Church of Satan and also supposedly made it to the rank of lieutenant colonel in the United States Army, Michael Aquino.
Oh, Mike Aquino.
I think he might have a Roman Catholic Filipino derivation.
Wouldn't surprise me at all. Because Latino, it's on my. I don't know if you've seen the video. Like, I have a video of him actually bragging about doing a black magic ritual at Heinrich Himmler's Wadelsburg Castle, and we all know how devout Catholic Heinrich Himmler was. Like, he even
almost certainly was a
in the German who's who. Like, he literally like. Are you kidding me? Like, we know Himmler was most likely a Jesuit, but like at least he was a devout Catholic. So the Aquino is doing these rituals at the Catholic Himmler's castle. Just made me think about that. With his name Aquino, like Aquino is traditionally a Catholic last name.
It has that Spanish. Yes, it has that Spanish Roman Catholic derivation to it, which is what we're talking about. And the Spaniards colonizing and conquering the Philippines by force, brutal force, typical of the Catholics.
Oh, and actually, I think this was Phelps. I gotta find a better source for this, but it makes sense because I know Anton LaVey from the Church of Satan is from San Francisco, literally a Jesuit fortress, like literally. Anton LaVey was from San Francisco, but Phelps said that he had a Catholic, upbringing, which would make sense. But what do you guys think of that?
Brilliant. I wouldn't. What is his? Hang on, George. What is his? His real name is funny.
I'm not sure LaVey's real name. I thought.
Yeah, it's.
I think from San Francisco though, like there's obviously a Jesuit in the woodpile if he's from San Francisco.
Yeah, Howard Levy. So the Jew Howard Levy, who became the embodiment of the Church of Satan, and I think one of the reasons why Aquino left him and created his own whatever, the Church of Set or whatever that's Set. Okay, that tells you what you need to know. How many times have we said that this traces its way through Egyptian mythology, Greek mythology, is because that he realized that Howard Levy was just a clown, that his purpose was 100% psyop. He didn't even believe in it. And Michael Aquino, being the dork of Satan that he was, wanted to be a serious practitioner. And that's my take on why it was that he left.
We have the Temple of Set even just from like their Wikipedia page, like it gives the impression that it's a more, I guess, like they're more like they're a lot more into this type of research from like the. Just if you read the Wikipedia pages of the Church of Satan and the Temple of Set, you know, for lack of a better word, it gives them more. They're into more extreme research in terms of black magic. I get that impression at least, and you know, everything about Aquino is just like, the way he does his eyebrows. You know, he has them curl up even to look like horns. You know, it's creepy, and the fact that this guy was like a military official is like the
Lieutenant Colonel, 05 pay grade. 05 pay grade. Unbelievable.
Well, you know, it ties in, and actually, you know, Rudy Giuliani, covered the the crimes at West Point when they were raping the soldiers or the children of soldiers, like disgusting stuff. And it ties into Barry McCaffrey. I found this guy that was mentioned in the article. Let me just pull up this name here. This was kind of ridiculous. This guy, this U.S. general, what was his name? Dirk. Let me pull this up here. There's a guy mentioned in the story who wrote an article for America Magazine. And it was all about how the United States Army can teach the Catholic Church or something about sex abuse cases. Yeah, it was James M. Dubik, retired Army Lieutenant General. He's mentioned a lot in that New York Times story I linked on Catholic Barry McCaffrey. But this guy, James Dubik, literally wrote, this year, February 13th, 2019, he wrote an article called What the Army Can Teach the Catholic Church About Responding to Sexual Abuse.
Mm-hmm. How to duck out of it. How to cover it up.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up. That's just, gaslighting, I think, at its finest. And, gatekeeping.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to tie that in. And, James Dubik is yet another, Catholic general that was, intimately involved in the Iraq War. And just to maybe wrap it up with this General Barry McCaffrey. Just another guy I wanted to mention, I don't think I brought this name up, is James A. Marks. Just the story, I'll just read a little quick blurb here from that New York Times story. General McCaffrey did play an indirect role in helping Veritas Capital, and we mentioned that was founded by Jesuit-trained Robert McEwen, who kind of, the official story of Robert McEwen's death is that he committed suicide, but I think there's probably more to that. But General McCaffrey did, however, play an indirect role in helping Veritas win one of its largest contracts to supply more than 8,000 translators to the war in Iraq. The contract held by the L3 Communications when General McCaffrey got wind of the Army was considering seeking new bidders. He called his friend James A. Marks. And I found this James A. Marks is none other a professor at Jesuit Georgetown University. He calls a Catholic General Barry McCaffrey's friend James A. Marks is a major general in the Army who is approaching retirement, who is versed in the uses of translators, having served as intelligence chief for land forces during the Iraq invasion. As General Marks recalls it, General McCaffrey asked him to lead an effort to win the contract for Veritas. And this General John Marks is also a CNN military analyst at the same time. And he
wasn't there part of the write-up that he also made a phone call to his buddy David Petraeus?
Yeah, Petraeus. Yeah, this guy's really close to David Petraeus. Yeah, I made a phone call to Petraeus about setting up a deal about sending 5,000 armored personnel carriers to the Jesuit-controlled Iraqi government. And Petraeus went to Georgetown. The story doesn't mention that, but I think this story here by David Barstow is a classic. I don't know. I think it definitely is gatekeeping, but like there's just a lot there. But I think they tried their best, limit as many. There's just no open connections. Like Barstow doesn't mention how McCaffrey was literally awarded the James Gibbons Medal, the highest honor that the Catholic University of America gives, for instance. Doesn't mention how McCaffrey's on the CFR, but the stuff on the war profiteering is, good information. But it's an example when this stuff, is forced to come out that they, I guess tame the story as much as they can. And like, because I was forced to searching in the names, like I found through my own research that a lot of these guys were plugged in to Rome. The New York Times, didn't tell me that.
Right.
But it's still a good story. But it's a tactic, that all news media uses when important information, gets disclosed.
Well, excuse me, fellas. I had to be going in just a moment. Just a little bit off topic. We're talking about the media. There's a name I just came across recently. Robert Blair Kaiser, who lived from 1931 to 2015. He actually died on April the 2nd, 2015. He was an American journalist and author. He is best known for his writings about the Catholic Church. Well, interesting. He is noted for a number of things. He wrote a book back in 2008 called "RFK Must Die." Robert Francis Kennedy, and he was a journalist. He wrote among other things, Time magazine. And of course, Kaiser was trained as a Jesuit from 1949 to 1959. He left the order to get married. But almost all of his writings dealt with religion, specifically the Church of Rome. So you had to wonder, this is pure speculation, was he cleared by his superiors? They said, okay, Bob, you can leave. You can pull a Jerry Brown. You can become, Jerry Brown, you can become a lawyer and get into California politics.
You
And they
can pull a
probably
David
said,
Ferry. You could pull a David Ferry. How many seminarians can we bring up that you could pull an Ed Murray? You're better off as a homosexual mayor in Seattle than you are as a Jesuit priest.
Well, great example. I'd say you could pull a Joseph Francis Carroll, being Catholic seminary, being ordained a deacon, then become the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Okay, so anyhow, so Kaiser, as I said, was he, or was it John McFarlane? I'm sorry, not McFarlane. McLaughlin.
Oh, the MSNBC Jesuit.
Yes,
yeah, the journalist.
He was actually ordained. Okay, so he was actually ordained by the Jesuits, and he was cleared to leave. Well, actually, before he got cleared, he worked for the Nixon administration. He was like a speechwriter or something like that, and he ran for office. I want to say New Hampshire, Vermont, somewhere in New England. I could go look it up. But he was actually given permission to leave his order, and he actually got married, not once, but twice. And so was it a case, with Kaiser, his superior said, okay, we'll allow you to leave and become a journalist, or officially leave. But I wonder if he was still...
Like, besides Time, like, was he writing for like the New York Times or the Washington Post or anything like that too?
He could have. I mean, he was a correspondent for Time magazine, and he did a number of articles on the Second Vatican back in the 1960s. And
definitely, it was definitely whitewashing it. That's for sure.
Okay, so I wonder if Kaiser was actually secretly ordained, and they said, "Okay, we'll just say you left us, so you can go become a journalist."
Yeah,
Well, I would say so. Given how owned like just the whole field of journalism is, I would say it's very plausible. Like it's so in your face. Like there's another blatant connection to MSNBC like, with John McLaughlin. There's this guy Bob Wright. Like no one talks about Bob Wright. I've seen in the alternative media, but Bob Wright was this chairman CEO of NBC for like 20 years, from like 87 to 2007, and he went to Jesuit Holy Cross. For instance, devout Catholic. So I believe it. Like it's stuff like, and there's been Jesuit priests like in the media, like who actually have their own, like Jesuit priests will get their own TV shows in this current Jesuitized society paradigm. Like there's that guy Jesuit priest Bill Kane had his own show on ABC. Or is that the New York Times even did an article on it. It's called "A Jesuit Takes Heat for a Gritty TV Series About Doubting Priests." His name was Father Bill Kane. What's a Jesuit priest doing as a director of a TV show? In this paradigm, Jesuit priests are on the boards of banks. Like we had a Jesuit Chris Lowney on the board of directors, and this Jesuit Chris Lowney, SJ, had key positions on the investment committees within J.P. Morgan Chase. For instance, you have a Jesuit priest, William, no, not William, O'Donovan. What's this, blanking on the first name. Father O'Donovan from Georgetown, who was at the board of directors at Disney and Riggs Bank.
Was it Leonard?
No, Leo.
Leo O'Donovan.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So like this, they were seeing like Jesuit priests, are all over. So it makes sense, George, that this Kaiser, would be ordained because Jesuits had infiltrated, all ranks.
Well, Teddy Hesburgh wasn't Teddy Hesburgh on a bank board?
Yeah, he was on Chase National, the Rockefeller bank. And actually,
Why not?
Emmanuel Josephson said, Emmanuel Josephson referred to Hesburgh as a Jesuit, and then Hesburgh does fit the role of a lay Jesuit perfectly.
Hey, and let me tell you, it is a fact that Jesuits infiltrated their sister orders. I would not be surprised. I've seen the accusation that Georges Lemaitre, who was Jesuit educated, a Roman Catholic priest, to the one who fabricated the Big Bang. I've seen an accusation, unless I can't remember where it was. Maybe it was me saying it. He may have been an incognito Jesuit, but I'm very happy.
Another great point. But what's a Jesuit educated Catholic priest writing the Big Bang Theory? How many people the majority of the Earth does not know that, especially the people who are a lot of the hardcore scientists are I guess rigid materialistic skeptics on all terms of views of life concerning religion and the soul of metaphysics. They mock religion consistently, but they believe in a doctrine that was created by a Catholic priest.
And I've repeatedly read media statements on when Francis I there came out and backed up how Darwin and the Big Bang. Yes, the Catholic Church backs up Darwin and the Big Bang. Meanwhile, not a single source, not a single media source bothered to mention, well, I would hope he does back up the Big Bang because a Jesuit-trained Catholic priest fabricated the Big Bang in the first place. So, I would hope that...
they definitely keep it on the wraps. I had never heard Georges Lemaitre once in all of my years of taking the mandatory science classes. I'm sure it's the same in the States. You got to take science from at least grade 1 to 10. And I took science classes optionally in grades 11 and 12, and I took a science class first year university, and nothing on Lemaitre, absolutely nothing. I heard all about Einstein, but just none of it. Nothing
meanwhile,
about the Catholic priest. And the Catholic priest actually, taught, kind of Einstein the ropes with the theory, stress this point theory, but the theory of relativity. It was the priest Lemaitre that kind of, tutored Einstein on that.
Excellent point. Why would we not know anything about the? At the bare minimum, we can call him Einstein's friend. We believe that he was Einstein's handler, and all the more reason why we would think he was also a Jesuit.
Of course, as we discussed before, I'm sorry, Johnny, I did address a number of your points. I know we're wrapping up. Okay, I want to talk about Michael Voris if I could and the church militant, but I will in just a second. People talk about figures like Albert Einstein. Of course, he created the Big Bang, or he was. People have this perception or this misperception is he's the one who articulated that. He came up with MC squared or whatever it was, and even though it was it Demetra or Lemaitre, or however you say his name, he's the one who concocted it. And Einstein was simply the face, the front man for that. It's just like when talking about Nazi Germany, people will invariably think of Adolf Hitler and maybe a few other names like Himmler, but people almost never, ever talk about Van Papen or von Papen.
Oh, great point, George. Just keep going to spot on, and just people don't know that Hitler was a Catholic. He was open with his being the Converted Catholic magazine actually has a picture from the German Who's Who's magazine, and Hitler proudly announces himself, every year as being Roman Catholic.
Yes,
like
and of
right
course,
in your face, like and just keep going. But it's like no one seems to know that.
almost, we've discussed this before. Almost all your prominent Nazis were Roman Catholics. You did have a few apostate Lutherans like Goering, who's a Freemason and a drug addict. But all your fascists in Europe at the time, from the 1920s, the Ustashi in Yugoslavia, Franco, Salazar in Puerto Rico, Mussolini in Italy, were devout Roman Catholic. So, I mean, you're talking like the fascists and Nazis in Europe were comprised probably by 99% Roman Catholics and usually devouts. Those are usually trained by Jesuits and Papal Knights of Malta, things like that. But people, Catholic apologists will say, well, yeah, Adolf Hitler grew up Roman Catholic, but he was just nominal. By the time he became an adult, he was just uh, he became basically more of a pagan than he was a Catholic. So there's a reason why they call them spin doctors. And so when you're talking about a modern view of the world, Rome has been basically responsible for it all, with your so-called sciences, with your political philosophy, journalism, media, Hollywood, you name it. They basically control it all. They'll uh, usually frontmen who may be non-Catholic, particularly Jewish. They say, "Oh yes, oh we have absolutely nothing to do with it." But something that uh, Eric has brought up before, back in the 1930s, the Hollywood production code was written by a couple of Jesuits, Lord and Quigley.
Oh, fantastic point. Yeah, it was Daniel A. Lord S.J. was the Jesuit, and Quigley was like a lay Jesuit figure. He was a devout Catholic, like a papal knight of Malta, the Knight of St. Gregory, and was on the board of directors at Georgetown and Loyola Marymount. So Quigley might as well have been a Jesuit. But great point. Like the actual code was written by and Daniel A. Lord, the guy who the principal author, and he admits it in his autobiography, which I have. Lord says that he wrote the code. He was like a fourth vow Jesuit, initiated to he would have been in the secret society in the Jesuit secret society. So he was the perfect guy to draft the code.
Yeah, fourth vow is claimed to be a very high up. That's you have to be you have to do. It's bad enough to be an ordained Jesuit, but then you work as an ordained Jesuit and basically commit crimes and prove your loyalty. So the more heinous the crime, the more loyal you'll be. And so fourth vow, blood oath, oath of extreme unction, whatever version, is someone that is all in.
Oh, absolutely. And great. Thanks for bringing up the oath. Yeah, so that extreme oath, Daniel A. Lord, the guy who drafted the Hollywood Code, would have taken that oath.
Right.
And it's not the Jews. And even the guy who founded Columbia Pictures, one of the Harry Cohen. A lot of people you point to him and say, "Oh, look, he was because he was like a mobster at the same time." So he's like, "Oh, look, the Jews are controlling Hollywood." Harry Cohen. But Harry Cohen married two Roman Catholic women, two of them. And this, everything about him was a papal court Jew. He would hang out with Mussolini consistently at his villa. He spent most of his time in fascist Italy. Is Jewish Harry Cohen, who founded Columbia Pictures. Just when you know that the Daniel A. Lord S.J. is a big Jesuit red pill revelation for it should be for people realizing that a literally ordained fourth vow priest who took that the most diabolical oath in the history of man to uphold the temporal power and spiritual power of the Pope wrote the official Hollywood Code, and they brilliantly kind of masked it. They called it the Hayes Code for a reason. And Lord even admits that in his autobiography. The reason they called it the Hayes Code is because he said they didn't want, quote, bigots in the media to he may even refer to them as Protestant bigots. He didn't want Protestant bigots to latch onto the fact that a Jesuit wrote the motion picture code. And Will Hayes, I think, was officially a Presbyterian, but he whored himself out to the Pope quite a bit. All you got to do is read his memoirs, and it becomes pretty clear that Will Hayes whored himself out to the Pope.
Okay, just quickly, you're talking about quote Presbyterians end quotes. Donald Trump attends a Presbyterian church. J. Edgar Hoover attended a Presbyterian church. Dwight Eisenhower, when he was president, attended the same congregation as Hoover. Ronald Reagan attended a Presbyterian church.
Okay, tell me about with Hoover. Are you talking about Herbert or J. Edgar?
I'm sorry, J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director.
Okay, I just want to clarify that because actually I found this. I was rereading the Peter J. Doiswick book, Roman Customs and Practice, and apparently Herbert Hoover, he claimed he said Hoover married his wife in front of a Catholic priest.
Yes,
that was interesting. And Hoover, we covered on previous shows. He accepted the Catholic Boys Brigade and wrote a kind of a love letter to Martin Connolly, the Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus in 1932, which kind of I'm just highlighting that because it shatters the notion that there's no Catholic power in the U.S. because Alfred E. Smith lost the election.
Oh, good for you. Good for you. What would you rather do? Would you rather have overt Roman Catholic Alfred E. Alfred E. Smith to be the president, or would you rather have supposed Protestant Herbert Hoover who sanctified his marriage in front of a Catholic priest? Yeah, much better. And meanwhile, afterwards, you can just go ahead and have an annual Alfred E. Newman dinner every year where you require all the non-papist puppets to come forward and make the Pope of America, the Archbishop of New York, laugh every year.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's brilliant how they kind of mask this in the shadows, like giving the illusion that they don't have any power. And they know the Al Smith dinner is purposely not talked about. But but you're absolutely just Herbert Hoover literally. That's the reason he won was because people were scared Al Smith, being a Catholic. So that's why it was imperative for them. And I found reading the book on none other than Wild Bill Donovan was a speechwriter for Herbert Hoover. Like, are you kidding me? And Herbert Hoover, you can see the photo of him with Pius XII. That's just what I wanted to mention. Lastly, on him, I think he went to see Pius XII in 1947, and in the photo he's kind of like bowing to him a little bit, in one of the photos.
Yeah, by the way, that's I'm going to put it in chat. That's a great. You already tracking this. The Hoover wedding scandal. Yeah, this is news to me, but great job, guys.
Yeah, I got to find more documentation. It's just Peter Doiswick just kind of mentioned it in passing. I was like, holy cow, he married his wife in front of a Catholic priest. Like, geez.
Yeah, much better to have. Go ahead, Jordan.
So, technically speaking, and I say technically speaking, the only Roman Catholic president the United States has ever had is John F. Kennedy. No, John F. Kennedy is the only out-of-the-closet Roman Catholic president we've ever had.
And how perfect is that, George, as far as plausible deniability? The only overt Catholic president, and he was viciously murdered in broad daylight. So clearly, George, Eric, audience, the Catholic Church must not have any power at all because there are no Catholic presidents, and the only Catholic president to be overtly so was killed. So it must be somebody else.
Well, the only overtly Catholic president wanted to get rid of the Jesuit Fidel Castro from Cuba, which was a big no-no.
That's also a no-no. We wanted to get rid of the CIA. That's a no-no.
The Federal Reserve he took out Ngo Diem, who is 10 times more Catholic than John F. Kennedy in South Vietnam. So in terms of Catholic doctrine, Kennedy violated church law by removing someone who is like a slave in perfect slavish obedience to the Pope.
And another way George, in another way, he was a good Catholic because he was having sex with anything that moved, including Cord Meyer's ex-wife. And that's why one of the reasons why Cord Meyer helped to blow his brains out in Dallas.
Okay, so, let's just talk about the unofficial Catholic presidents we've had. We talked about Herbert Hoover. We've talked about Bill Clinton, in the past who was. There's a photograph when he was in Africa. He went to the mass and received the wafer Eucharist or whatever they call it, and that created a furor. Wait a second, doesn't he know as a non-Catholic you're not supposed to take?
Yeah, you're not supposed to do that. That's a big no-no. I don't know why. That was just an act. That was a mistake. That was.
I wonder if Billy's Jesuit education had something to do with that. And Bill actually admits this. I have this on my blog. I thought this was like a bombshell press release. But he gave a speech at the Vatican called Bill Clinton's Address to American Seminarians, where he just unanimous praise for the Catholic Church. He's like, I'm amazed that the Pope is so rigorously involved in our world affairs. Like, are you kidding me? Brags about how the whole Democrat Party goes to the Vatican. Like, Bill even admits that. Like, I learned how inspirational the Catholic Church is to like the American way of life. Blah 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 blah. He even admits that like there's a Jesuit. It's McSorley. He doesn't name McSorley. He even says that there's a Jesuit that me and Hillary really like, called in the speech. So Clinton, he's another great example of a secret Catholic. And you look at all of his appointments around him. Bill Clinton was surrounded by devout Roman Catholics.
Well, and not only that, but George, I keep forgetting, George, you made that fantastic find that he actually went to a Catholic, was it a grammar school as well?
Yes, in Little Rock. So one of Clinton's handlers in the 1960s was Dick McSorley, SJ. Now, I know that may sound like an Irish venereal disease, but it's actually Richard McSorley. Yes, he went to St. John's Catholic School in Little Rock. As you said before, one of your books, I believe, Illuminati Mask, he was Jacques de Molay. He was a high-level Freemason. Almost certainly, I mean, if he was not a Knight of Malta, he should be. So by the power vested in me, I do hereby declare William Jefferson Clinton to be a Knight of Malta, because he's served the whore faithfully for decades.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he's an undeniable closet Catholic. Just another one that you can go down the list. Like if you actually analyze it, every U.S. president has been a closet Catholic. But right before Clinton, you had Ronald Reagan, who kind of like Clinton was educated at a Catholic school. Reagan's dad was a Knight of Columbus,
and his brother.
I believe he had some Catholic schooling as well. Did he not coming up?
His dad, Jack, was a Knight of Columbus. George, are you saying that his brother was also a Knight of Columbus?
Yes, Neil. And something I mentioned before. I know.
Great information. Just to clarify, so you had Neil and Jack Reagan, both Knights of Columbus?
Now, Ronald Reagan's first wife, Jane Wyman. Nancy Reagan was his second wife, Nancy Davis Reagan. Okay, Jane Wyman, she was single at the time. She actually converted to the Catholic Church and actually became a Dominican nun. One of Reagan's, so at least one of Reagan's children actually became Catholic. I believe Maureen, maybe two, Pat. Also, he sent one of his sons, Michael, to Loyola High School in L.A.
Oh, so fantastic information! Wow.
So you could say with Protestants like Reagan, who needs papists?
And I also want to bring up that Michael was adopted and also a victim of sexual abuse.
Yes,
not by Reagan, but by like a foster family.
Yes, so you could say that, and of course, Michael. Okay, so you have within the family, you have the Hegelian dialectic. You have his son Ronald Prescott Bush, who's an atheist and avowed uber hardcore alt-left socialist, communist. But then you have Michael, who's just the flip of that. He's like Mr. Right Wing. So
also, what's the daughter's name again?
Okay, he had 5 children. You have Maureen, Patty, and there's another one. I forgot who the other one was.
But at least Ron and I want to say, was it Patty? Another one, very hardcore extreme left in their ideology, which is and blood children. His blood children Michael is the only one who is hardcore conservative, and he's the adopted one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And then Michael went to Loyola, and this is like, and Reagan was knighted as a Knight of Malta officially in 1989. I think to seal it off. And you go, and again, if, like uh, Clinton, if you go through Reagan's appointments, it's just papist after papist after Jesuit trained after Jesuit trained. Like you had back to back Georgetown trained. Reagan sent back to back Vernon Walters and then Jeane Kirkpatrick as American ambassadors to the UN, for instance. And, it's the exact same thing if you analyze the Clinton administration. And if you go right after Clinton, look at George Bush. He's another secret Catholic. George Bush set the record. 6 presidential visits to the Pope. Like Rick Santorum even said that George Bush is more Catholic than John F. Kennedy. Like, I'll pull up that Catholic Wind in the White House article. They even admit that like George Bush is like a secret. Like one guy calls him a secret Catholic, and he's like, "Well, I'm not. I'm actually like not kidding." Like, George Bush called. He said he saw God in the eyes of the Pope. And like Ronald Reagan, there's Jesuit Catholic connections in Bush's background too. George Bush is George Bush and George H.W. Bush are named after Jesuit-trained George Herbert Walker, who was the Wall Street financier back in like the 1930s. Yeah, like literally, the Washington Post literally says, "This is the Protestant George Bush. Bush has also placed Catholics in prominent roles in the federal government." Like that's just one line, for instance, from this. I'll pull up. You can get this article. It's on my blog, and you can still get. I know Johnny Smith covered this article on a previous post. Everyone should, archive this story. But yeah, so this was. So it was John DeLuio. John DeLuio. This guy's, I assume, is John DeLuio, a Catholic. Bush's first director of faith-based initiatives, has called the president a closet Catholic, and then the author of the Washington Post said, and he was only half kidding. Like that's right in your face. George Bush, I did a video. He spoke to the Knights of Columbus convention in Dallas in 2004 and just, bowed on his knees to suck up to the Pope and like the Vatican hierarchy. And there's just interesting, there's an interesting connection in Sherman Skolnick's book, The Collected Writings of Sherman Skolnick. He makes a connection with George Bush. He makes an accusation. And Skolnick to me is kind of like an Emmanuel Josephson. He's Jewish like Josephson, but great information. But some of it, you have to some of it, is coming from his word like Josephson. But overall, I think Skolnick's a solid researcher. But he says late in 2004, the Spanish king, that being the Royal Order of Saint Januarius, Knight of Malta, Knight of the Equestrian Order of the Sepulchre, Juan Carlos, met with George Bush at Bush's ranch with Vicente Fox, who is the Jesuit-educated president of Mexico, who also worked at Coca-Cola. Bush met with Juan Carlos and Vicente Fox at his ranch in Mexico, according to Sherman Skolnick. Bush secretly agreed to surrender Mexico's sovereignty parts of. So let me go back here. Bush secretly agreed to surrender to Mexico sovereignty parts of Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. Such a secret arrangement, all those states have Catholic governors. Such a secret arrangement not only violates the U.S. Constitution, but reverses centuries of history. Hoping to survive, a nation's leader does not seek to give away territory taken over in a previous war. And then Skolnick puts in brackets, the parts of the U.S. states were won by the U.S. as a result of the U.S.-Mexico War of 1949. George W. Bush commits treason to reverse the same. So he's accusing Skolnick accused Bush of signing an agreement with Jesuit-educated Vicente Fox and plugged-in papal knight Juan Carlos, King of Spain, to literally reverse the war of the U.S.-Mexico War territorial treaties post 1949. So apparently Mexico, according to Sherman Skolnick, will eventually move up into the United States. And just think about all the massive waves of illegals coming in. Think about the sanctuary states on the southern border. California had a Jesuit seminarian literally as a governor, and they became a sanctuary state. I don't know. I think it's a credible accusation from Sherman Skolnick here, and this is from this book, Sherman Skolnick's "The Overthrow of the American Republic," Writings of Sherman Skolnick, page 390. It's an interesting accusation. Because if you analyze what's going on, we talked about earlier on the show, James Tamayo is like leading the floodgates in Laredo, Texas. Literally, the first place all the Catholic illegals come to is the Catholic Church, where they're then given like government documentation, and then like they're able to assimilate into the Catholic Church is able to provide them connections like that. Because this is another huge part of American
And of
society.
course, as we talked about.
Oh, sorry. What are you saying, George?
Excuse me, I had to be going in like 2 minutes. Tamayo, as we've said before, is a retired colonel, U.S. Air Force Reserve, as a chaplain. So he's committing treason on multiple levels. I mean, he took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Therefore, he should have taken an oath against his own church and against himself.
Well, absolutely, George. He's an in-your-face traitor, and actually, just with this accusation with Skolnick, Tamayo is a big part of this, plan that Skolnick exposed here. But well, who's that soldier, the Riley, that American soldier during the U.S.-Mexico War, that Skolnick says that the Jesuits were trying to reverse? It was Riley. What was his first name?
John
Riley. Yeah, that soldier John Riley actually leave the United States Army to join the Catholic. Because he said that like the men we're fighting against are all Catholics like me, so he joined the Mexican army.
And of course,
we're kind of seeing that history though, like resurface, and like Skolnick mentions, like the supposed plan is to give Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas back to Mexico. All the governors on these states are Catholic. You have Jesuit trained Steve Ducey in Arizona. You have currently Jesuit trained Gavin Newsom in California, Catholic Greg Abbott in Texas. Who's the New Mexico governor? She's a Catholic as well. Or
Michelle Grisham.
Yeah, Michelle Grisham's a Catholic as well.
And
of course,
a former New Mexico governor, Bill Richardson, went to Orgy Island, Epstein's Orgy Island.
And of course, all the governors of California in the 21st century have been Catholics. You have Newsom, you have Jerry Brown, you have Schwarzenegger, and you had Gray Davis. The last time we had a putative Protestant governor in California was in 1999, Pete Wilson. He was technically speaking a Presbyterian, but almost certainly a high-level Freemason. So something I mentioned before, ever since Reagan officially reestablished diplomatic relations with the U.S. and the Vatican in 1984, 35 years ago, they said, you know what? We're not going to hide in the shadows anymore. We're just going to be in your face and out in the open. We're in charge. We're going to officially be the governors of the states. We're officially going to be the attorney generals of the states. We're going to be the DAs of most of your major towns. We're going to be the police chiefs, the mayors, and if they're not Catholics, they're deviants. They're like this girl or this woman in San Luis Obispo.
George, to your point, it was under Reagan's presidency that they decided to create like the military archdiocese. That wasn't until '86 that they felt confident to come out in the open with that.
And of course,
go ahead, George. I was going to say, it's just going to wrap it up. It's a great place to wrap up. Is this Cantrell person, which you thought was Catholic, and now we're not sure anymore because you got the Cantrells mixed up. But really, it brings us full circle. How many times have you seen a so-called classic movie? And in the classic movie, all the cops, the archetypical cop in the movie is an Irishman or an Italian.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about like Car 50. I know the TV show, but Car 54. Dirty Harry, Harry Callahan. Now, we never find out what Harry's religious affiliation, but he's obviously of an Irish background, probably Catholic.
I gotta see the movie Patriots Day. Isn't Patriots Day a big like that's all about the Catholic Mark Wahlberg's like the hero Catholic Boston police official who saves everyone during the marathon bombing, and the real life chief of police in Boston at the time. I think his last name Evans, Bruce Evans, I think. William Evans or William Bruce Evans. He went to Boston College, and now he's the head of security at Jesuit Boston College. So that's his reward for managing the martial law situation in Boston. And then like, you see like it's a part. So after they do this treasonous behavior, they make propaganda movies with their Catholic
Exactly. What
puppets.
happens when you have a false narrative? We have something that people are starting to question is so obviously an outrageous false narrative. You back it up with the reality, the quote unquote, the false reality of Hollywood. That's where you get dinosaurs and deep space and false flags.
Well, I'm not, going to give the whole argument as to whether people should observe Christmas. That's a different conversation altogether. However, it is de rigueur that starting, at least in the United States, in late November, early December, they'll show It's a Wonderful Life, with Jimmy Stewart, which was directed by Frank Capra, Italian Roman Catholic, Knights of Malta. That is something that has, been tradition for decades. So,
we're trying to get out, but George, I'm going to throw this in, and the most disconcerting thing about Santa Claus and Christmas is that it's so insidious. If you are willing to be a part of a lie to teach your children the complete and bold-faced fabrication of Santa Claus, what other false reality lies are you willing to be a part of?
Well, of course. I mean, this is a different show. I mean, yes, I would like to talk about this, but owing to timing constraints, we don't have time. But yes, I don't observe Christmas, but that's besides the point. Okay. However, out of ignorance or whatever, you have millions, tens of millions of people in America and hundreds of millions of people around the world who observe Christmas. As I said, something that has been a tradition for a long time in America is to show It's a Wonderful Life before Christmas. And you have others like Frosty the Snowman and things like that. But it is especially hideous to show It's a Wonderful Life because of the director, Frank Capra, who made a name for himself before that with Mr. Smith Goes to Hollywood, also starring James Maitland Stewart. But during the war, he directed several of the Why We Fight films. And
so, George, why is he involved, George? Why was he in Knight of Malta and involved? Because he needed Americans to buy the bullshit that to fight the machine. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. All that bullshit. You can fight the corruption and win. It's okay to believe in Santa Claus. It's okay to believe in the American dream. Norman Rockwell, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, Rome is controlling a massive, corrupt, obnoxious, heinous beast committing terrible crimes all over the world against Americans and against other citizens, but it can't do it without the support of the American people. And that's where propaganda scum like Capra come in to help Americans to believe that the beast, the monster, the system, the beast literally that the harlot is riding upon is actually listens to them, can respond to the democratic process, and they have nothing to worry about. It's okay. Have faith. Everything will work out. It's Frank Capra. Happy ending.
Yes.
That's the purpose of
Frank. And of course.
Oh, great point. Yeah, people should, they're on YouTube. Everyone should watch the Why We Fight series just to see the propaganda value of it and, see how they insidiously, it is pretty insidious how they, riled up Americans to, it's all about fighting like the tyrannical enemies of Nazi Germany and Japan, but it was it's cleverly done at the same time. But it's all gaslighting at its finest. I guess that's the.
And then when the crimes come to light, it's America's fault, and not the heinous insurgents, not the Catholic puppets that were running things. It's America's fault. America did Abu Ghraib, not the Inquisition. Yeah, right.
Oh, absolutely. And just, I know you guys gotta get going soon. I'll wrap up with this. This kind of ties it into just what I kicked off the show with the Catholic Barry McCaffrey, the war profiteer at Defense Solutions. Imagine you found the CEO of Defense Solutions, Timothy Ringgold, is on the board of the University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, he's at the Wharton School of Business. Yeah, it's not just UP, but it's our pedophile president's Wharton School of Business.
Yeah, that's
The
another
University of Pennsylvania.
another connection connecting that school to the Vatican, because people should look at the alumni list of that school. It's very powerful to say the least. But I was going to tie it into an example of how people will blame America and say, oh, like greedy American companies like Lockheed Martin are like the devil, and like it's all about condemning America. When Lockheed Martin, for instance, this is what I'm tying, because it all ties into war profiteering with the Catholic General Barry McCaffrey, who was given the James Gibbons Medal in 2004. McCaffrey, like we covered, was on the DynCorp, Defense Solutions, and Veritas Capital, just to name three of them. And oh, do you gotta get going, George?
Well, yes. Take care, Johnny. Take care, Eric. Well, we'll get together soon.
Yep, we'll do another one real quick.
I'll keep in touch. I was just gonna say there's an article from bizjournals.com from 2002, and it's titled Santa Clara the Jesuits Santa Clara University gets Lockheed Martin gift. But we know Santa Clara University is Jesuit. At the bottom of the article, it says Lockheed Martin's corporate giving has totaled nearly $1.5 million to the private Jesuit university since 1967, including over $700,000 to the engineering school, $360,000 to the Levy School of Business, and $200,000 to the Daily Science Building. This is the school where CIA Director Leon Panetta went, and then on the day of the Bin Laden raid, Jesuit educated at Santa Clara Leon Panetta says the cameras weren't working.
Yeah. Fantastic work. Meanwhile, Lockheed, Raytheon, DynCorp, all involved in human trafficking. So this is the lowest scum of the earth. There's nothing patriotic about these monsters.
Oh, absolutely. And just in terms of Lockheed, they recently built Saudi Arabia's missile system, which it's just being used in the war in Yemen, killing a lot of innocent civilians, for instance. And I'm going to run down. A lot of people don't realize how owned Lockheed Martin is by the Jesuits. The claim actually came from Der Spiegel magazine that the Jesuits outright control Lockheed Martin. I don't think a lot of people realize this. Der Spiegel is, an authoritative news source. But currently, there's a woman. I'll keep this short, Johnny. I know you got to go soon. But there's this Marianne R. Levan, who's current senior vice president, general counsel, Lockheed Martin, and she's a member of the Jesuit Fordham Board of Trustees. That's the current senior president and general counsel at Lockheed is on the Fordham Board of Trustees. And I found here this guy, Orlando Carvalho, who is the former executive vice president of Lockheed, who oversaw their F-35 fighter program. The F-35, it came out, there was a lot of wasted tax dollars spent on the F-35. That's probably why, because Orlando Carvalho, who headed the program, went to Jesuit Fairfield University. And there's many, many others. Like Lockheed Martin, for instance, and Lockheed Martin Aero Club and Lockheed Martin Aeronautic are corporate sponsors of the Catholic Charities of Fort Worth. I'm just going down the notes I have. Fort Worth is the same city where the police were doing gun buybacks at a Catholic church. I found Lockheed is also connected directly to Jesuit Georgetown University as well as Santa Clara. This is coming from bsa.org. To empower, quote, more young women to pursue degrees and careers in science, technology, and engineering and math in STEM fields. BSA, the Software Alliance, Lockheed Martin, and Georgetown University, that's Jesuit, are sponsoring the Washington, D.C. area's inaugural Girls Who Code Summer Immersion Program. So now they're getting into our AI programming as well with Lockheed. The Girls Who Code program, kicking off June 24, will bring 60 young women throughout the D.C. region to Georgetown University's downtown campus for 7 weeks for, quote, intensive instruction in computing skills, ranging from mobile app development to web design to robotics. And this is, I just want to keep this quick, so I'll let you respond to this, but I just know your time's short. I found a lot of professors, a lot of Georgetown professors are working and have done work for Lockheed. There's this Kimberly Martinez, current lecturer at Georgetown. Right on her biography on the Georgetown website, Kim serves as an internal communications manager for Lockheed Martin. And she went to Georgetown. Are you kidding me? There's another one here. There's a vice president of technology and policy regulatory affairs at Lockheed Martin. This lady's name is Jennifer A. Warren. I'll repeat, she's vice president of technology, policy, and regulatory affairs, and she's a current professor at Georgetown. And previously, she was the director of the Space and Strategic Missiles sector of Lockheed. And she's a professor at Georgetown, Jennifer Warren. There's also Mary M. Van de Weg, who's a professor at Georgetown, who was the senior vice president of finance for Lockheed Martin. That's just one of the companies that she was involved in.
We could have done a whole show just on the Lockheed Martin connections. We could have
it's crazy, Johnny. Like I found it. This is a story in Michigan City, Indiana, from FranciscanHealth.org. This was like 2015. There's this headline: "The energy efficient construction of the new Franciscan Health Michigan City Hospital, which on January 12th has earned $294,000 in incentives from NIPSCO's Business Energy Efficiency Program." Kirby Dipert, field engineer with Lockheed Martin, presented Franciscan health officials with the incentive check.
Wow.
Like, are you kidding me? And there's just another one I found here. Just Abby Comminger is a senior associate at Lockheed Martin, graduated from Loyola University, Chicago. So, like, this is this is just one company. There's John Nicholas, current professor, looks like at Loyola University, Chicago, who has held businesses of engineer and team leader on aircraft development projects at Lockheed Martin and at Bank of America, who in the same article, Der Spiegel claims Lockheed and Bank of America are controlled by the Jesuits. Well, I don't mean to keep rambling. I'll let you respond.
No, it's all fantastic information. And I'll just add this. Both the F-35 and the F-22, really all the advanced fighters for the major services are made by Lockheed. And you wonder how it is that the F-22 and the F-35, despite being plagued with problems and issues, and I remember for the longest time they were saying, you can't even fly an F-22 because you black out for an unknown reason. Maybe there was an impurity in the oxygen filtration system for the pilot, all kinds of weird-ass problems. And surprise, surprise, Lockheed, which is, hey, wait a minute, Lockheed built the SR-71 for SR-71 Teddy. So,
yeah, great point. Yeah, that's a Lockheed. Great point. Yeah, they probably paid for SR-71 Teddy's, private flights.
I wouldn't be surprised. And meanwhile, you've got all these defense contractors being intimately involved in the most heinous, unbelievable crime, trafficking in women and children. So this is not a patriotic endeavor. This is not us, we, our military, our planes. It's all controlled by criminals, heinous criminals. They're not have nothing to do with the American people. They need to be stopped, and we're going to do it.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to stop. Do you have to get going? I see are you heading to the gym or something, or going for a run? I see.
Yeah. I got stuff I got to jump into. But if you still got time, man, we can jump in again, either later today or tomorrow. If you still have, you still want to.
Yeah, I got the next 2 days off at work. I got lots of information I want to get out there. So yeah, we can definitely. We'll,
tell me what's good for you, and we'll do it again, man. Because I know there's a big desire for it within the audience as well.
Oh, I'm glad to see that too. That lots of people are, I think once you see this, it's a house of cards, and you begin to see that the veil is lifted. And actually, to use I got a book in the mail recently from this converted Dominican priest called Walter Montano. He wrote an article in one of the converted Catholic magazine issues. That's how I saw him. But he wrote a book called Behind the Purple Curtain, and that's what I think we're doing. We're lifting the purple curtain of Vatican intrigue, and showing it to its true, its true, its true naked face. Well, it looks like Johnny legged out there, though, guys. But yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one. All the best, and peace and love.